Good morning, one and all, wherever you are. We are here now together with you. It is the 16th of October, Sunday, and a few of us have again gathered to talk about the mental obsession openly and see if we can't ferret out some of the issues that might seem secret and hidden and talk about them openly to see that the idea that they're hidden, first of all, is not true. The idea that the absolute nature of the absolute is not real, and reality and truth, to look at that and start to see that it is not what's said here. It is what you do with what is said. It is how you apply it. It is how you try it on. It is how you decide to think about it that makes the difference. And I suggest that because it's how you think about things now that is making the difference, that may be causing you to wonder why you have obsessive thoughts. So if you're wondering why and wondering how to stop it, we look at how we start it and how compulsive we can be in that craving for the next thought, 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 the next fix, the next fix, the next fix, the next fix, thinking it's going to solve it, not notice that that repetitive nature itself is an announcement to us to give us some perspective, some awareness in our human experience that we're doing something that obviously deserves our attention in a more honest, accurate manner than we've been giving it to it, for it to continue to. If you stub your toe and it hurts and you keep stubbing the toe as a solution, the chances are you're going to keep witnessing that pain. And the question is, if somebody did that for years and years and years, how to stop it is to look at how you're starting it by continuing to stub it. So it's just starting to notice that the moment right now is free. We are free by nature. We have the choice, opportunity to choose anything we want, which includes not choosing, which is critical to understanding the nature of a relative universe where things seem to be separate from each other, but are in fact intimately bound to one another. So good is connected to bad, and right is connected to wrong, and up is connected to down, and in is connected to out. They aren't separate things, they're intimately connected. So if you're trying to make one extreme point as though that point is the only thing that exists, you are pushing against reality and truth, and you won't succeed. You can imagine you are, you can think you are, and that tends to be how most of what I did growing up and living was figuring out how to be defensive about what I was doing and pretend I wasn't doing what I was doing. So I numbed myself with denial, which I said earlier before we got started is basically the anesthesia. Psychic anesthesia is denial, saying I'm not doing what I'm doing. I don't want to be doing what I'm doing, rather than saying I must want to be doing what I'm doing to be redoing it all the time. There must be some want in that, some desire in that. And if I start getting honest about what I'm doing, I realize that if I'm responsible for what I'm doing, I can still act irresponsibly based on thoughts that are not responsible. Doesn't make me irresponsible. It doesn't make this a moral condition of being immoral. It makes what I think immoral and non-virtuous and non-useful as a result of thinking things that aren't true or true. They have no applicable purpose. And I would define that as the difference between right and wrong thinking. Right thinking applies. If you apply it, you don't have to think about it from then on because you know it works. So you can just keep applying it. And if it doesn't work, you can apply it and it won't work, and you can reapply it and it won't work, and you can reapply it in a new way and it won't work, and you can reapply it again in a new way and it won't work. And if you're addicted to that thought, you're not going to notice the evidence is telling you something isn't working. So it might be good to look at that and notice that and see that anxiety and stress and the depression that we end up facing is an accurate consequence of the depressing, weighty thoughts that we're giving pressure to, that we're creating pressure on by resisting the things we're doing and thinking against thinking is going to win the fight between thinking. Diamonds, hardest surface we know on earth, can only be cut by diamonds. Thoughts cut thoughts. Our thoughts happen in our brain. They happen as close to the source of where pain is registered as anything in our body. Everything else is at a distance from the brain. But the brain within the brain is immediate. So when we have mental anguish, it is immediate. There is no gap. There's no relief. There's no potential distance between us and it, between our experience and it. So it's a prime motivator for what we do that's sick, in the sense that it isn't healthy and it isn't normal and it isn't natural. versus what we're able to express by beginning to concede the fight and see the fight can never be won, to try to straighten out the thinking that's wrong, but notice that the wrongness that I feel about myself and the disconnectedness that I feel about myself and such is talking about a self born in thought that is disconnected because the thoughts I'm having have no substance. It's like having no denominator in a fraction. 0 is a denominator, means the number on top could be infinite and it still comes out 0. There's nothing there. And that's disconnected. It's my thinking I'm experiencing. I'm witnessing. I'm observing. And if I am observing my thinking and so clear as to say, I feel wrong, I feel bad, I feel ashamed, I feel guilty. Guilty, by the way, is not a feeling, it's a verdict. I'm admitting my awareness of being guilty for what I'm doing and using feeling to justify it's something I want to try to get away from and get over because I don't like the discomfort. If I'm doing all those things and observing them, who am I to be observing the things I'm doing, but something greater than those things? Thinking is something humans do. It is not who we are. It's a function. Just like my arm I can flap my arms all day long, and I'm probably not going to start flying or become a bird. I can think I am, though. Action will prove me. Action proves, carrying out action, physical action, proves whether or not the theory is right. The theory of thought is right. If it fails and fails and fails and fails, something is wrong in the approach. It may be that the smaller steps that are needed haven't been taken to get to the bigger end. It could be all sorts of things, but if there's a little bit of progress, there's some indication, there's some possibility that the thought has some kernels in it that are useful. But when there's never any value, there's never any usefulness, nothing ever proves out, and we deny it and pretend it isn't there, that's clearly a sick thought trying to parade by capturing and consuming our attention full time to make believe that our focus on it creates reality of it rather than just simply creates a distraction that isn't attractive. It's a distractive attraction, which means I'm not paying attention to what's actually happening in the name of being consumed with thoughts about what isn't happening. And that's the essential definition for insanity. Hearing and seeing things that aren't happening. And when I'm talking to myself about those things, I'm talking to a self born of thought, because when thought thinks of itself, it thinks of a self born in thought, ego. I'm not who I think I am. I am actually the observer of the things I think. So that's who I am, and I would suggest who we are. And if we talk about it from a unified state of cooperation and interaction rather than interreaction, we start seeing the natural awareness we have is much greater than the thinking we do about that awareness, or the thinking we can do about that awareness before we concede that awareness is the basis to our existence, our being's existence. So these may sound heady, but I would say when you start noticing the thinking you're doing, any clarity in conversation or consideration will begin to allow. It's kind of like stepping off. If you put your hand over your face, you might think the whole world's dark. You take your hand a foot or two away from your face, it doesn't seem that way. If the clarity in the conversation offers you a sense of things getting worse, it's a clarification of the worst things have been and the things you're maintaining, the things that are happening now that are still brewing in you like a backdrop running, like a hard drive running with a fault, and it's trying to correct itself, and it just spins and spins and spins and spins. And if you ever feel the computer when it does that, for instance, a hard drive, it gets very hot because it's taking an enormous amount of energy trying to do what it can't do. And that happens for us. We get inflammation. Our systems break down. We get high blood pressure. We stress. Those things start to impact our whole bodily function. They undermine our ability to express health and express our nature, which is to heal, not to create disease. Disease is an indication that something's wrong, not an indication of that we're winning the battle of becoming all we can in terms of our ability to express an absolute knowing state of being. So that's all we talk about. And the point is, there's nothing I can say that will ever change anything for you without your willingness, ability, which you have the ability, whether you exercise it or not is a choice, to look at what's happening for you and start to see it as something happening for you, or not to you, but by you, to start to actually recognize that if there's a natural, responsible, absolute source in the universe at all, and everything beyond the universe, I would say the universe is small compared to the concept of the infinite. It makes the universe nothing, effectively, a speck compared to the potential. But if you can begin to consider that and begin to notice that and begin to concede that if it's so, regardless of what we think, we start as humans to employ that, just like a fish knows that when it wags its tail, it's not like a dog when it wags its tail, it's telling you it's happy. A fish wags its tail and it swims automatically. It doesn't sit around and say, I got to learn how to swim and figure water out before I can start. It knows that if it does that gesture, it's going to move through the water, and it doesn't think about it in the same terms we do. It just knows what it knows, so it does what it does. That's how we are designed to function on the ultimate capacity. I would suggest, again, just a thought, versus this sort of fractured state of fighting for our own seeming reality against all odds and against all people and against all things, and wonder why we can't seem to survive very well collectively. And we put ourselves at risk and do things that don't add up socially, and constantly think that somehow we're going to heap the burden on some individual to come to our rescue, when none of us are doing the work we can to actually become the individuals that that person could rely on to actually be useful in a broader sense. So that's maybe a short version. I don't know how long I prattled on.
Thanks, Chair.
Yeah. So Anthony, and what you were talking about, the chance to begin to see this, in my experience, comes in a conversation with others, because it offers us perspective that we're never doing this alone. So being ashamed doesn't make any sense, because if we're doing something we're ashamed of, it's typically something we want to hide and keep to ourselves. But if everybody else is doing it, what's the shame? The shame is not sharing it. It's not talking about it. It isn't that we did what we did, because if we did what we did, we did what we did. In the moment right now, the present is a culmination of all the things that have ever happened, including everything we've done. So if there's any salvation or redemption, it's now. It's what we do now that makes the ultimate difference in either repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating the same chronic behavior, or beginning to notice that any reluctance we have and any ability we have to take a breath rather than commit to a new thought over and over and over again chronically is the beginning of seeing that every inhale comes with an exhale. We're born on an inhale and we leave on an exhale. Completes the cycle. So in between, there's an even amount of inhales and exhales. It's not an odd number at the other end. It balances. So if we're balancing what we're doing now, it's starting to see that everything's already in balance, and it's the positions we take in relation to those things within our own thinking that create the imbalance, and start to talk about that. And again, I don't think it's a popular conversation, or a lot more people would be having it. But my suspicion is it's worth having, so that it creates an environment that's more conducive to the conversation and allows for that sense of ease to allow people to approach it, rather than feel immediately it's not something they need to do. It's not something they want to do. They don't want to look at the negative. They don't want to think about the things that are wrong, when in fact, to think you're not looking at the negative is to maintain the negative, and to think you're avoiding the wrong is to maintain the wrong. It's been going on now for thousands of years. Humans have been masters at it. We've gotten better at that than just about anything else. And I would say it's worth looking at and maybe not doing, maybe starting to actually relieve the pressure on thinking that's the only option. So Gabe in LA, and Matthew and Jana now. Anthony, welcome. Good morning.
Morning, Jay.
Morning.
So last week at some point, we talked about the time in between this discussion as being probably the most fertile ground, because everybody gets then to have their own perspective. You're not in the face of my continuous voice, contesting everything said and thought and challenging ideas. And, it gives you a chance to step back and kind of contemplate these things. So anything that comes up in that process would be good information. While it's not there anymore, it's here. The here-ness of it is the ability to hear it, listen. So, any thoughts attached
Early
to words?
Mornings. Yeah, the early mornings.
Morning, Matt.
Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Ideas coming through. The first thing coming through. And then second thing would be, I don't think I want to do that. It wasn't a thought. An approach to a task was something that I hadn't contemplated. And then if I stayed with intuition, reason beyond, I originally planned to do this, and to put that into action and trust it was really good and very different. And then very early on, waking up, a different thing happened about a different opportunity to put. I'm not saying ideas into action. I'm talking about this, there, and obviously being in the eternity of this present moment, being like this in carrying, I'm not leaving this spot. And I've listened to, the non-duality stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of two, and I'm going to think myself into one. No. That's a lie. And so it allowed me to almost bathe, luxuriate, be on a lilo on a swimming pool, that just go, it's nice. And it felt calm. It felt kind. And just lovely hearing you talk about growth, or it shrinks or it's small. It just is. And third and final thing, in a situation where, is it happening now to me? No. But to know where a stimulus would trigger a particular response, and just go, inhale, exhale, be present. And then I am no longer driven by that. There is a chance of a choice. So it's been a real kind of, this in the early mornings was quite unexpected. But thank you.
Well, in Matthew, in relation to that, you sent me Father Bill W.'s podcast from Austin, Texas, who's an Anglican Episcopal priest. And he said that the primary success of AA was founded on, and recovery programs, two-way meditation, which you probably listened to, the early one. And he was talking about it being, what we talk about it in here is this awakened state of awareness is a combination of prayer and meditation, because all of our choices are prayers. If we're absolutely responsible, then everything that we choose is a prayer. And we don't make choices because we don't expect something from those choices. We make choices to get things, to do things, to accomplish things. That's why they're made. Doesn't mean we have to make them. And it doesn't mean we're driven by them. Until we forget that we're the driver of them, do we think they're driving us? Yeah. And that blindness of addiction immediately sets off. And it comes also from this idea that duality can be separate when they're just separate considerations on a range of possibilities. So it sounds to me that the simple sitting back a little bit is showing you possibilities you might not have normally thought, because you were clinging to the only ideas you had about those things. And all of a sudden you thought, I don't have any obligation to maintain this, and I can. There's the freedom is you can do all those things without being condemned and thinking they're doing it to you. So when people said they're being driven crazy, I'm like, you're not in the passenger seat. You are in the driver's seat. And to begin to concede that is to create more clarity. And the problem with responsibility is that it includes responsibility. And most of us have thought that freedom and vacation was getting away from responsibility and somehow avoiding responsibility, because that structure of being able to do something to the exclusion of the consequence of that thing we're doing is effectively the sick nature of making believe that within a duality, you can have one and not the other.
Yeah.
So I can do the thing and not have the consequence. And when you begin to realize, oh, I have been, those things you talked about not happening always had an impact on you as though they were happening in the present because you were thinking of them. When we're bound to those thoughts, we think of them as real. So the impact on our body is the same as if they were happening. Now that's crazy to subject ourselves. If we're thinking the house is on fire and the house is not on fire, and we're subjecting our body to the sensation of an emergency that it goes into full bloom to try to protect us from, and we're using our body in ways that it's not designed to do, it's designed to do for actual emergencies rather than fantasy emergencies. We are literally misutilizing our body, so when we need it for the emergencies, it's not ready. It's kind of like the fire extinguisher. You play with the fire extinguisher for 6 months, and then you have a fire, and there's nothing left in the fire extinguisher. It doesn't make sense if looking at it obviously and actually. And you talked about calm and peace. That's the source of love is the ever-present nature of, I wouldn't call it an everlasting state. I would call it an ever-present state, because my sense is it only lasts within the context of time, which is a mental thing, rather than the ever-present nature of things that aren't in time, which is absolute. That's why they don't change. There's nothing, time changes because distance change. Time and distance are combined. That's why Einstein talked about space-time, because he saw that they were the same thing. So it's saying, wow, we're always in a meditative state. And what I do with my human brain, what I choose to do to misutilize or utilize, and the misutilization isn't a misutilization until I try to make believe that what I'm doing isn't what I'm doing. If my brain's telling me something's wrong, that's what it's designed to be doing, is analyzing things to help protect me and help me to survive so I can have more, do more, have more, and be more beneficial to others, because that's what love does. If love gave us all the things we have to share, our misutilization of those things is the lack of ability to share them abundantly enough to say there's enough for everyone. And we don't say that there's enough for everyone. Humans have starved on this planet since this planet started. Humans within reach of food starve on this planet. They don't have water, in reach of water. Today, in the advancements we've made, we haven't seemed to figure out the most elementary aspect. That would be like people suffocating from air and us saying, we don't know what to do. We just can't figure it out.
Welcome to the group, Matthew. So it's good to have you here.
Yeah. Thank you.
And you don't have to pretend because you're on camera that everything worked itself out and it's all right. We want to hear more about like that struggle that you talked right before it worked out.
Anthony, you might want to hear more about that struggle. But the dilution for thinking about it is something we all share, is to start to see that if we're sharing it, we have absolutely no commitment or requirement to continue to maintain it. And the freedom from it, if there is any, and I'm not saying that there is, I would just suggest that my experience is that there's absolute freedom, is coming in the actual conversation and starting to talk about the things that are apparent in ways that aren't usual, because it's starting to break that consuming nature of chronic repetition that has become so usual that it's unusual because it's backward. Addiction is backward. Addiction is trying to turn a lie into truth. The one thing a lie can't be is true. So the one thing that can't save us is addiction. What does it do? Kill us. Overdoses. Those overdoses aren't limited to chemical problems because they include, or aren't limited to exterior chemicals like heroin and all the new opiate commercially made opiates and all the drugs that exist. None of that stuff. It's the chemicals we create in our body that also kill our body, that undermine it, that stress it, that minimize its capacity, undermine its capacity to function at a healthy level, that cause diseases. Mental health is core to physical health because all voluntary action starts with our thinking, and all stressful choices impact our bodies and others and are depressing as a result, because that weight isn't how our body's designed to function. It would be like carrying an 800-pound backpack every day, wondering why our knees were getting sore or our ankles, or that we were getting tired or couldn't even lift it. I mean, 800 pounds might be a little bit of much for an example, but say 80 pounds. Let's take a zero off. So the exercise here is just talking about it in ways that look at that stuff, Anthony, and also begin to notice that when you're looking at it accurately, there's a freedom to realize, just as Matthew said, possibilities started to open up. If I heard it right, you just started seeing things differently.
I like when you told me that time, you said, you don't go to an AA meeting to hear how great everything is for everybody and everybody's sitting around and telling you how wonderful they are. You go there to hear what's really going on, the struggle.
Yeah, well, if we're here to talk about what's really going on, what really isn't going on are all the stories we have about things not happening. So what's really going on here is a chance to actually intercede on those stories by simply starting to talk about them in relation to the sickness accurately, rather than tell the stories over and over and over again so we can all feel better about someone else being worse. Because that's generally the trend. Well, boy, I'm not as bad as him. I feel great. That's a pretty sick concept. There, but for the grace of God, go I. That person, apparently that grace does not stretch to that person in that thought. There go I in the same way that I felt I had no grace by maintaining thoughts so sick as to think that was all that was happening. That might be a little more accurate. And I don't think I've ever put words to that in that direction, but it's worth thinking about that the person isn't lacking grace. They're lacking exactly what we're talking about here, which is an honest appraisal of what's going to impact their sensation to the degree that they think they're not connected to something that's absolute and whole and regenerative and abundant and loving and caring and constantly revealing more information intuitively, not because they're thinking about it, but because now thinking is actually like a dam using that energy to express it, using that knowledge as an expression rather than as something to hold back. Eventually, like you sent me that picture last week of the dam, Matthew, the dam running over. Yeah,
the river, and also this experience, if we talk about experiences being frozen or traumatic events in the issues in the tissues, and then the vulnerability of stepping back and breathing and being in just the space.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is, though, we think of that point as being vulnerable when it's in fact invulnerable. But what we're witnessing is the vulnerability of the bullshit we've been maintaining and the stories we've been repeating that have maintained the stress in the body, and think that somehow the body is stored it somewhere that we have nothing to do with. And it's the maintenance of it right now, thinking the same story is the same story is the same story in my head, and not noticing that it's what I'm doing now that's maintaining the stress. The body will let it go as soon as we stop the story. It may take a minute for it to really be relieved. I mean, my neck for the last couple of years has gone through it. I could barely turn it. I had to turn my shoulders. And it's complete. I get cracks out of it that sound like bone breaking, like glass breaking. And it's been interesting because that's where so much of the stress channels, because it's coming out of the brain, but it's also feeding back into the brain.
To just to be and look and see and be in awe of things, and to have that And when I remember as a kid looking out to the adults and they're like, what are you looking at? And it was almost like, oh, shut that down as a protection. And so what's interesting is like, it's not a rediscovering, where it's just affirming that was always there.
Yes.
And it was always there.
Yes.
And it's almost like, in terms of, the inner child work or inner teenager work or critical parent, and just the extraction of that two-way prayer of asking and then getting a response that I didn't expect to get. And then you're like, oh.
I didn't go that deep into that, but he was talking about the fact the early people in AA would actually write out a script of what God would say to me if God is who God is a loving, supportive, abundant source. Yeah. So I would say, here are the things I want. Now, what do you think about it, God? And then the thing would be, I love you. I know that you're complete. You're a product of my love. So I know that can't be. And all of a sudden that reinforcement started to actually get people into a mental practice like we do here of considering that loving source is always here. It's always been with us. Jack Kerouac said the enlightened man recognizes he's always been enlightened. And I'm sure he was referring to women given his history too. So it wasn't limited to men. It was something that we all have, we all do. And that thing you just pointed to is the wakening up to seeing it's only what I thought about it that gave me the impression that it wasn't there. And I can still think that about it. And I still do to some degree think that about it, because when I choose to do things, they aren't done until I act on them accordingly in a way that actually is productive and useful. So every little step to get to that thing I'd like to get has to be done right to accomplish that thing. And if I don't do them right, I got to correct those things. And it's that fluidity of being able to notice that the give and take and the coming and going, those things all come together. The absolute nature is expressed in duality being the same thing rather than being seen as separate, because we take different positions and our disposition represents those positions as though it's some intractable thing other than the thought we're having now. And to get numb to the thinking we're doing as though we're not doing it, numbness is an indication of pain and something wrong. It's not the absence of pain. So that desensitization that we get from chronically redoing this and thinking that by doing it more, it's going to solve the problem is the sickness, Anthony, that we're here to discuss. That's the sickness, this constant. It's not the bits and pieces of the stories. It's the fact that we even use the stories in the name of thinking we're going to get better. Or
you know what? I also, when you said that, I realized I also try to use the guise of I'm going to figure it out. Like that's, not just to get better, but I want to figure it out first.
Think of the term though. If you're figuring it out, you think it's in. You think it's figured in already.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like it's figured into the tapestry of life, and you're going to figure it out. You got to get out of it because you're in it.
Yeah.
It's just another way of seeing it from a place that you're stuck. It's the same thing when we say it's driving me crazy. We're thinking of it as something separate from me because I'm thinking of the thing I'm doing is so right that I'm thinking of the thing that's also possible is completely wrong enough to think isn't even happening.
Yeah.
Rather than seeing that cause and effect are immediate. Karma is immediate. If it takes us lifetimes to finally come to terms with who we are, I would say those lifetimes add up to a commitment in the moment that's denying what we're doing. Because who we are is exactly who we are, where we are. And if we're denying it and it takes us lifetime to come to terms with what we're doing, that's a pretty good indication of how resistant and how willing we are to fight for something that doesn't even exist, has no basis.
So do you think you have a mental obsession problem, Jack? If somebody was to ask you, you're at dinner and they said, well, Jack, do you have a mental obsession problem?
I do whenever I think thoughts that aren't true are true, and I think thoughts that are true are not true. Yes, that's the whole basis of it.
Is that every day? Would you say how often of a thing?
Yes. If I was better at this, I'd speak better about it, and I would probably make a greater impact on people because I would be speaking in ways that help them see what they're doing a little clearer and quicker. And it would be unobstructed by thoughts I have that I struggle with and try to put together in ways that I can speak better to them. This is a conversation I had in my head for years. and finally realized I wasn't having it with other people, except in ways as to kind of peek out a little bit and see if they were receptive. And I took their lack of receptivity as thinking I had nothing to say. So I kept it to myself and then wondered why I felt depressed more and more. So talking about it openly is what we're doing to start to realize that this is the interim. If we're here for 2 or 3 hours a week, there's 165 or 166 other hours during the week where we can begin to engage with people and notice what we're doing. We don't need to sell anybody on anything. There's nothing here to sell if everybody already has it. But if we talk more openly and more honestly and speak for the things we're thinking about, we will probably be willing to admit the thoughts we're having that are wrong. Whether they're right or wrong is going to be irrelevant, because honesty isn't about talking about things right all the time. It's about talking about what's happening. And if my thought is wrong and I admit it, that's very freeing compared to making believe I have to wait until I get it all formulated and right. And that was to the point of this discussion. I kept it small for a long time, one-on-one, and I realized I wasn't doing it more publicly, where I could get more challenged and also be under the weight of everyone looking and listening and seeing what's the impact of the conversation? Is it useful for other people? Are people getting better at all? And what I learned was that people often get better by seeing what they're doing and feel worse because they're seeing clearly the bad they've been doing for so long that it starts to become obvious they've got a serious problem and it might want to be addressed, rather than using the denial to make believe they don't. And that's certainly true for me, Anthony. I lived a lifetime thinking fighting and defiance and defensiveness and denial were my source. That was my mastery.
It does have your picture in the dictionary definition.
Yeah.
How about when somebody says, well, is this a cult, Anthony? How would this be different if it was a cult? Would you would tell other people, is that the difference of a cult? Just answering the question for somebody else, let's say. What is the difference?
I don't really think of it in those terms, but cults typically have an individual that claims to be the professor, the indisputable source of knowledge and information. And that is not what we have. And it's not what AA proposes or any of the other 12-step programs.
That's the only difference.
I don't know. Again, I haven't spent a lot of time looking at cults. I know what's difficult.
Did you just think of that?
I know what struggle is.
Did you just think of that?
Well, think of culture. Starts with cult. Think of culture. The question is culture a cult? And I would say probably. We're always looking for somebody to pin the tail on, a president, a prime minister, somebody in charge to assassinate for the failings that we aren't willing to admit as a society. If this unity we're talking about unifies us, then we are not doing well as a population to allow people to lead us because we're not leadable. We're all preoccupied with our own thinking rather than what's actually happening as a unified social dynamic. And I'm not talking about coming up with a new way of looking at it or thinking about it, but an absolute sense of it happening right now as a unified field that isn't being addressed in conversation. So how well are we going to deal with it when it comes to expressing it? And I would say we're dealing with it as well as we are based on what we're thinking right now. And I would say that's not very well. I would say there's some failings there to be reckoned with and notice. We wouldn't have newspapers if there weren't.
I like what you said when we first started talking before we actually recorded, but I was a little upset about something. And I remembered you'd said, even if I'm mad at myself, it's not even the real self that I'm mad at. Whoever I think I am is probably not really everything I am.
But you know why you're mad at that self, Anthony?
Why?
Because that self is based in fear and anger and self-loathing, because there's nothing wrong with having a self. There's nothing wrong with identifying with characteristics and taking on traits and playing roles. Nothing wrong with it at all. But when we think it's who we are, we now have sanctified those things as something that are intractable and that we can't separate from because we're talking about them as intrinsic to our existence, which they're not. They're choices. So as soon as we cross that line, just like a thought, I can have any wrong thought I want. And the awareness, it's like drinking poison. None of us were addicted to poison. Nobody here was drinking rat poison and saying, God, I can't imagine why I'm getting sick. Right? You get sick and say, boy, I got to stop that.
Or you say, I got to really stop eating those burgers late at night every night. Those things are killing me.
I'm making a distinction between things we get addicted to or things we make believe are actually helping us and saving us from the feelings we're having, rather than see that they're actually hurting us, but they're giving us an impression like drugs and alcohol do. They change our consciousness to give us a lighter sensation. But in fact, why would we constantly be searching for a lighter sensation if something heavier weren't at play and getting worse? And that's the difference between an addiction. So when the self is angry, it's recognizing the anger that the self is made of because we've asked it to be and do what it can't be and do. We're asking it. It's like asking the navigator on an airplane to get in the pilot's seat and land the plane. It's not what they're there to do. There would be some natural resistance to that and probably a horrible outcome as a result.
And what's funny is I didn't want to mention, especially on recording too, like I'm mad at myself even. I didn't really even say why, but just the thought of me being mad at myself is like so embarrassing.
Anthony, all compulsions, all impulsive behaviors, all reactive behaviors are abusive, self-abusive. They're all attempts to escape from the internal grind that we maintain in the thinking who we are is what we think.
Yeah, so then I was glad that I did mention it because you went on to explain it and made me feel better about it. Because I'm like, okay, I see what's happening when you take it too seriously.
Well, I would hope you start feeling worse about things so you can actually feel what is happening rather than try to feel better about things that are worse. Because the addictive nature is to try to feel better about things that are bad rather than what lines up is that right is right, right? Wrong is wrong. When wrong is wrong, that's right. Yeah. When a lie is a lie, it's true. It doesn't make the content of what's being promoted as the lie true, but it makes the concept of the lie being told true. And there's relief in beginning to, even if you admit to yourself that what you're talking about is a lie because the conflict exists, you don't have to say anything to anyone to find relief in that.
Yeah.
But then the clarity.
I just found that out, buddy.
The clarity starts to set in that it makes no sense to continue doing the thing that caused the stress.
What if you could just hide it better? Would that be a good option?
So it becomes
hide it better.
You
Become
can't
a better
hide it, Anthony.
Of hiding it.
You can't hide it. Anxiety, stress, depression, all of those things are witnesses for the prosecution of the guilty verdict. They're all telling us that we're doing that thing. That you never hide it. The lie detector is a perfect example. It's there to test essentially heart rate and perspiration. Why?
There's no beach ball here.
Because the body reacts. Can people overcome the lie detector? Yes. But it takes practice, and that's what I would say psychosis is and narcissism and all those things where all of a sudden all you ever see is what you think, and good all example. You ever think anyone else should see is what you think.
Yeah, good example.
So there's plenty of that going on. And I would say to any degree that we carry those thoughts, we are doing that thing too. The lens of our own understanding is colored by the understanding that we're doing.
That sounds like a quote. I love it. It explains a lot. I didn't want to admit that I'm mad at myself. Once I did, you explain what that's about. And now I feel better. It's okay to admit.
Again, Anthony, if you're feeling bad, that's a good sign that you're actually aware of what's going on. And this isn't about trying to get over this stuff. So it's about starting to see that when you do something, we've got an accurate radioactive Geiger counter giving us information. Yeah. And if we refuse the information, we're doing our best to think we can overcome it in thought rather than simply concede that our greater awareness, our sensation, our sense of knowing is all functioning properly by telling us that our uncomfortable sensations are about something we're doing that's uncomfortable. If you can just concede that and live with the discomfort.
Yeah.
It's like living with the feeling. If you live with the feeling, you start realizing the feeling is feeling what you're doing. It's an accurate assessment. If you're putting your hand on something hot and thinking the best thing you can do is get over it, your hand is going to hurt and burn. It's going to damage your skin.
Yeah.
So here it's just talking about it openly. That's the job. And allowing other ears who aren't participating in the conversation and can't be called on and talked to and get into these little tit for tats that we occasionally have and maybe have the freedom to start looking at what they're doing in the way they're doing it and start to concede that perhaps being honest about it, starting with what we do, would offer the kind of awareness that Matthew was referring to, where all of a sudden things that seem to condemn us and possibilities that seem to only be limited to what we thought, all of a sudden become greater possibilities. Why? I would suggest everything that's possible is always possible, always. Morning, Douglas. So ultimately, our communion is silence and peace and love. It's a natural state that has no noise in it whatsoever because it's not within the realm of audio. It's not within the realm of bodily sensation. And yet we know what we know, so that confirms the present nature of that presence, and that we all have that. We are all aware of that. We all know that. And I would suggest when we don't express it, we mourn that and we grieve that. And we are ashamed about that lack of expression. And we are guilty for it and feel those things. Guilt isn't a feeling, but if the verdict is guilty, feeling it is the awareness of the guilt that we've created. Good morning, Douglas. How's the weather in Cabo?
It's a cool, breezy day today. It's lovely. Thank you.
Glad to see you.
Thank you very much.
So that silence, Anthony, everyone, the essence of an absolute knowing sense is quiet, which is what meditation typically tries to mimic.
You figured it out. You figured it out. Now I don't have that problem now.
Well, it's never not been figured out.
That was a joke.
Yeah. An absolute source is not, you don't need to figure it out because there's nothing to figure out.
Right.
And that's the beauty of love, is that it's just always present. It's always our nature. It's the glue and the binding nature of existence. And it isn't binding in a sense that it holds us, because that would be hostage taking and captivating. But it's captivating in an awesome sense. When you were talking about, Matthew, you were talking about awe. Isn't it odd that we call awe awesome, like it's some, and yet awful is full?
Just before, when you said about misaligned, and just the word of alignment, even physical alignment. And, and when I am aligned, and that can be anywhere, there is a different attraction rather than promotion. There is a different kind of energy.
Well, consider that you can't be malaligned. It's impossible. You're always aligned in an absolute state, because there is no variation in it. There is no difference in it. There is no change in it. So there is no comparative analysis. There's none of the things that brain does in it. It's just a present state of presence, period. And I would say that's the knowing nature of omnipotence and omniscience and omnipresence and all of those things that are omni, because they're not divisive. They're indivisible, inviolable.
He said the energy's better. He likes the energy better.
Well, what you're doing is noticing that the impact of the energy you obstruct creates a weight that's very difficult to bear, which is depressing. And that's all caused in thinking, not in reality, not in truth. It's a function of possibility within reality and truth, but it's a choice we make to have those things, just like jumping in a pool is a choice to get wet.
This time last year, I ate lockdown. I ate lockdown. I was like 96 pounds bigger. And the way my physical being now has changed.
Yeah.
The ability to flow and move is, I feel like I'm in flights.
Yes. Well, think of something that doesn't have, we always talk about being grounded.
Yeah.
We're actually trying to confirm that we're connected to the planet. We're already grounded, by the way. Bodies are grounded. Gravity's done that. You don't need to, we're already grounded. We talk about wanting to be centered. Stephen Hawking said in an infinite space, everyone's at the center because there are no edges. So we're already centered. We're already grounded. But you're talking about an awareness of you're talking about an awareness of freedom that isn't bound by the ups and downs and the backs and forths and all of the conditions that would be commensurate to a physical experience. Yes. That's the awareness of that absolute knowing state. That is it. And it's seeing that it's very light. And think of light. Light is both thought of in terms of weight and in terms of brightness. Right? So what are the obstructions? The ideas we have in our thinking that are in conflict create the impression, they cast shadows of doubt, and we feel doubt as a result and feel the weight of that, and it becomes depressing the more we do it. Naturally, we're creating that sense of depression, like a tropical depression in Cabo. You know it's coming. You can feel it. The air gets tighter. It gets thicker. It gets almost quieter. There's a sensation that comes with it. We create that in our own experience and then think of it as something happening to us so that we can avoid responsibility for it, when in fact, if it's happening, we're responsible for it to begin with. Being responsible doesn't mean we can't act and think irresponsibly or think and act irresponsibly, because thinking, I'm going to suggest, is a primary action. So when in sobriety we're told to take action, if we're taking action based on contrary thinking, that's why we're told to take contrary action, because our thinking is still contrary, still backward. So we're admitting that it's there, but not saying, well, why don't we just straighten the thinking out? We won't have to take contrary action anymore because the thinking will align us, because we're naturally aligned. We're already aligned. We can't be malaligned in an absolute sense, but we can think we are, and then do things that prove that our thinking is what we're relying on as truth and reality, because all of a sudden we manifest things that are not very well adjusted in the world.
Bill kind of talked about that as, alignment of the will.
Yes.
The proper use of the will being to try to align to what is, align to the infinite possibility, and to let go of my own will, which is constantly trying to put on the brakes, block me from scary possibilities of things that are coming at me from out there.
Yes, and, as though they're coming at us rather than... My sense is too, Doug, will, as far as I can tell, is just choice. Mm-hmm. So if we're asked not to make choices, that would mean to just lay in a vegetative state and never eat and never breathe and never do anything that's possible. And he also says thinking is, that we're given thinking for a reason. But the reason certainly isn't to kill ourselves and others. That would probably not be the highest and best use of that reason, right? So to do those things would be unreasonable.
And I have a brain to use, but I
exactly
tend to use it to create all manner of inventions.
Yes.
To try to make me somehow in charge of everything, or somehow disguise my lack of knowledge of everything, my lack of understanding of everything. So I have to make up and construct little stories that then tend to tangle my will or my thinking up and cast those shadows.
So I'm here to antagonize ideas. And when you say you have to do those things, I'm going to suggest that that's the addiction to think there's no other choice.
Right.
And that ultimately, if we say we don't know, we're admitting within thinking that the thinking doesn't know, but that we actually do know, and we're simply not expressing that knowledge in thought. That's all. And what the 11th step talks about is thought sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact. It doesn't say to improve our contact. So if that's the case, we're always contacted. We're always connected. We can't be unconnected. And it's what we do in our thinking that gives us the impression we're disconnected, because when I have thoughts that have no basis, they have no substance, they have no place in reality, and I would naturally feel disconnected entertaining those thoughts as truth and reality. So what we're talking about is starting to notice that our body somatics and the information we're getting is actually accurate, but we're then thinking of it in an addictive sense and thinking we need to get over it and away from it rather than say thank you. That's really good information. I'm uncomfortable for thinking things that are they're discomforting. Why wouldn't I feel uncomfortable? And rather than run from the feeling, start to say thank you and live with that information as guidance. And all of a sudden, I begin to recognize that I am designed to correct my errors and designed to correct my wrongs, just as the steps teach me. Fourth step is not about an inventory of everything I've ever done. It's a moral inventory. Why? Because my thinking about thinking is corrupt and immoral is my source. It isn't my source. It isn't our source. It's something we do. It's something we have. It isn't something we are. It's like my body. I have a body. It doesn't make it who I am. Until I start thinking my thoughts are who I am, do I start thinking the self I think of is who I am? Do I start thinking the body is all that I am? And now I have to look very warily at the whole experience of life because I know for sure that body's going to die. And I feel imperiled all the time trying to avoid it rather than see that that's actually just the end of the story. It's actually transitional. It's if I'm looking to transform during life, certainly that would be the greatest transformation I can do because I'm completely literally deforming the body that formed around the same things that weren't there before I started this experience in humanity. They came together to manifest this experience I'm having. Certainly, I wouldn't be missing once I don't have this experience. I would be aware of that greater capital will of a power greater and knowing at a level well beyond my thinking. But my contention is, and what I would hope, if there's hope here, we could look at is see that we don't have to wait till near-death experiences or dying to actually witness that. We are actually capable of doing that during our existence, and we don't need to create life-threatening situations to actually admit it. And yet that tends to be exactly what it takes for people to come to terms with their hopelessness.
Notion of you saying about conscious contact. And that what I'm experiencing is almost, it feels out of control. When
yes,
I'm like,
it is
wow,
out of control.
Oh my God. And the lie was I was in control in the first place. It's like, actually, you stopped capping it now, let it flow through you.
Think of the word out of control. It means it has no control. It's like the word unmanageability. It means there's nothing that can manage. If I'm trying to manage something that doesn't even exist, it's the idea I can manage it that's the insane idea.
Yes.
It's the same with something that's out of control. Of course it's out of control. It's literally out of control. It doesn't have control at all because it doesn't even exist. What kind of control could it have if it doesn't exist other than the thought that I have that it exists right now? There's nothing there, absolutely nothing there. So the freedom is ever present. We have never been condemned. We've only thought we were. And the consciousness Bill was talking about and also struggled with is the mental consciousness of thought, not the absolute consciousness of knowing that he referred to so beautifully as infinite, unlimited, omnipotent, all-powerful.
Omnipotent.
And there were 5 of them that he uses in the big book, but they were all absolute terms.
This is like coming to the surface, scuba diving, but I'm here.
Well, but think of it this way. If this is absolute and the unity of duality is seeing that everything's connected, the surface was always there when you just chose to go down under the water. The surface doesn't go away any more than the planet all of a sudden appeared once people passed the horizon. Because I would suggest that they never got to the horizon because you can't reach a horizon because it's always in the distance. All they came to was the place that had never been seen because nobody bothered to approach it. And if we've been afraid of our own thoughts being self-centered, thinking the limits of the thought are the edge of death, we basically haven't traveled to see that, no, everything starts at the limit of our thoughts. It doesn't end. Everything else that isn't what we're thinking begins there. It's not the end at all because an infinite space doesn't have an ending. That's what we're doing here, is noticing that our thoughts aren't flat. They're not coins. When we want to be self-centered, the reason is we're trying to stay away from the edge because, it's scary out there. I might fall off. There's an abyss. No, the abyss is my thinking right now that there's an edge. That's it. And that I can be centered from that edge rather than see we're all centered. Where there's no edge, everybody's in the center. It's a complete shift of thinking from relative terms to absolute terms. And I would suggest that's exactly what the steps were really designed to give us. And Bill saw it. He just struggled with the mental aspect. My sense is humanity had struggled with alcoholism for thousands of years. He came up with a very clean alternative to drinking that was almost assured, if anyone even had the capacity to be honest and simply took direction in the most elementary direction, they could be freed from that seeming curse. It was never a curse. It was what we were thinking about it that cursed us. It was our own thinking that did it for each individual, each one of us choosing to think the only thing we could do is the worst thing we could do. And what we wanted to do was get better at managing that worst thing, thinking that that's life, and life is difficult, and life is hard, and life is impossible, when it's the impossibility, difficulty, and hardness of our own thinking that we were up against. Had nothing to do with life. Only the possibility of that thinking has to do with life, because life lovingly provides all possibility, which is to consider that life and love have no basis in our existence.
As it turns out, it seems that no matter what I think, that I can always find another human being who will support that thinking because they are equally or similarly convinced.
Well, Jana always talks about that as the conspiracy. The conspiracies, So my sense is the conspiracy theorist is trying to distract from the conspiracy of the theorist. Mm-hmm. He's creating conspiracy theories to distract from the theories that he's conspiring to maintain, he or she.
I was a young salesman, and I was taught by this old guy who used to sell aluminum siding up in the prairies of Canada. They made a movie about him called The Tin Men. And he told this theory of sales to get people agreeing and to trap people in a box. And it was called the box. And so when I would meet the customer, I had the bottom of the box was that they would talk to me about what I was presenting. They were willing. And then I had to support the four sides of the box and put the top on the box by getting them to agree that it made sense, that they were comfortable with it, that they could afford it. And the fourth side was that they wanted it. And then once they agreed with those four sides, then I could begin to tap the top onto the box and give it to them. And when I live my life that way, that if I just have this, and once I get that, if I think like this, that one works, that seems to all fit together. I think I've built myself a nice life in this sort of limited space thinking. And then one day, one of the sides falls down, or some termites eat something off the side. And next thing you know, I'm beginning to explore the idea that there might be something outside my box. And I grow older and I get more experience. And suddenly I realized that I limited myself. And then I have this horrible feeling that the limitation was perhaps unnecessary. Then I realized it was absolutely unnecessary. Then I have remorse, guilt, and I go into another trap, another box that I fall into that I have a really hard time to get out of. So it's the whole idea is, after I learned that, I began to realize how easily people could get out of the box if they just wanted to get out of the box. All they had to say was, I don't want it.
Our discussion here is really conceding that point, Douglas, because the difference is, if the box is only created by what we think, then certainly if we didn't think we were in a box, it would certainly change the confines. But I would suggest in an absolute state, thinking out of the box is irrelevant because we've never been in the box. And my sense is that what we have misapplied is the idea that we need to keep coming to thinking terms. We need to get thinking to finally agree that we're absolute rather than concede that we're absolute regardless of what we think. And I mean that in an absolute way. So thinking is irrelevant to the natural state of our being and the natural state of life and the natural state of love and the natural state of light. Whatever those things are, they seem to exist regardless of what we think. So why is it we keep thinking I need to do something to get to them rather than begin to concede at the fundamental basis of my existence that my thinking is irrelevant to those things? And now my thinking has the freedom to start actually taking that lead and doing exactly what the book says. We have a new employer. What does that mean? I'm going to do the job I'm here to do. What does that mean? To express the capacity that I naturally have.
That was good.
And it would naturally and intuitively no longer baffle us because I'm not baffled by constantly relying on my thinking is going to solve the problem. And if I do this and I do that and I do this better and I do that worse and I stop doing this and I fight that, I'll get there, rather than say, wait a minute, I must be there now. And if I'm here now, which I would suggest to everyone, if you ever wonder where you are, just stop and say, here. Clearly, we're exactly where we always are. We have exactly what we always have. There is no doubt in any of that, though it may come to the observance of starting to see what we'd rather have and think we should have, and all that starts to get clear too when you're in that, but it doesn't change what we have right now and where we are, ever.
And the reaction of others can be, why don't you care about this? Why aren't you bothered? And I'm like,
morning, Moe.
And
good morning.
Reaction,
how are you guys doing?
The reaction to that, two things. The reaction to that can be perceived as socially, that's you being rude, or why are you being so quiet? And it's like,
I strive for rude. I do, because you know what? We've used the idea, Bill talks about being kind and tolerant. He doesn't say lie. He doesn't say dishonest. He doesn't say find where religion is right, look for where religion is right. He doesn't say don't observe what's wrong.
Yeah.
He's talking about honesty.
This last week, there was a situation where someone was like, we need to do this, this, and this. And when that wasn't happening, and something I thought, I called it out completely. And there was clarity, there was complete clarity, and there was no denial of it. There's no holding anything down. But just going back to what Douglas, you inspired me with, I was almost having reruns of Plato's allegory of the cave, where the people are trapped in the cave and they're watching the things on the wall. And only when they go outside and they're like, what is this? A brave new world. And I feel like there isn't a brave new world. There is this world here now.
Remember, too, even in his allegory, people revolted against the idea that the thoughts they were maintaining within the cave could be challenged.
Yes.
And that, I would say, is an awareness historically that we have a dysfunctional tendency when we function dysfunctionally. When we think dysfunctionally, we have a tendency to dysfunction. Why would that tendency be there? It's a manifestation of the thought. Dysfunction is an automatic consequence of the thinking that's dysfunctional. So what would the thinking be? Thinking unto itself, thinking about thinking. Thinking my thinking's my source, rather than recognizing I have a knowing source. And if I already know everything, I don't need to think of it at all. And all of a sudden, like you were talking about those have to do's, generally speaking, when people have to do things, they don't do them. Pretty ironic. It's pretty ironic. But when you start just saying, look, this is something we can do, the fact is, do we want to do this? And begin to align with the fact that if we're always doing what we want to do, and yet we think we have to do it, we've created an internal conflict that we're not doing what we want. That's lunacy. It's crazy. That's what New Year's resolutions are about. In Gold's Gym, which I've been a member for 30 some years, in the first 3 weeks of January, it is packed with new faces. I mean, packed. But 3 weeks in, they're all gone. Okay. And the fact is, when I think I'm going to do something against all odds that I didn't bother doing the entire prior year because I've made a resolution, I'm choosing to pick a new fight to do the thing that I've already agreed I don't want to do by experience. And all of a sudden and if I miss 1 day or 10 minutes, all of a sudden I am so ashamed and so pissed because I failed, that all of a sudden the day turns into 2 days and a month and 6 months and 11 months. And I'm back to December making my New Year's resolution about 30 years ago was no New Year's resolutions. And I have succeeded every year beautifully because it was just crazy making. So the point is, we set the stuff up, then we don't want to admit we did it, so we can blame and fault everything and everyone else. And we still do it to any degree that we carry on thoughts that are depressing and cause this reactive, impulsive, compulsive behaviors. The amount of compulsions we have are all expressions of trying to escape that line of reason, that line of unreasonable reason, irrational thinking. If we are responsible by nature, then we are always responsible. And to think that I am doing anything less than what I want is to think that somehow I'm being forced by some outside source. Now, what is that? Ego. It's the idea that who I am is just what I think. All of a sudden, I become what I'm not. If I become who I think I am, that's not who I am. So I think who I am is all I think. So what do? Think more about myself. What do I get? Worse at doing anything productively. Why? Because that's not who I am. It's just what I think. And it's gone like this. So ego is a choice, like time and future, past and future are a choice. They're just stories, like Douglas was saying. They're stories we tell about things not happening. But you know, the irony is the story we tell about those things not happening are happening in the present. And how much time do I have left to spend when I'm telling stories about things not happening on what is happening? And wouldn't that lead to some dysfunction? Wouldn't that normally manifest a dysfunction to give me some evidence that, hey, you're on a path? Yes, you're on a path. You're seeking a solution. Yes. But if the solution is the problem and you're seeking more of the problem, that ain't a solution. That's still a problem. And start to notice that alignment means if wrong is wrong, when I admit I'm wrong in any regard, just because I feel the disturbance, what I always say to myself is what my mother used to say when she saw my face. You're up to something. She could tell. And I know it and deny it by thinking I'm going to get over it, and rather than say, I'm up to something. I'm in one of those. I said to my wife the other day, I said, I'm probably not at my best today, so you don't look as good as normal. And just claiming my own vision is obstructed by my own preoccupation. And I have to remind her that it's not always about how we're interacting. It's about how I'm interacting. And if I don't mention that, she gets the wrong impression. So she started laughing because it gives her relief to notice that she also has those days where she's consumed with her own struggle. And if I make it my business, I'm just pissing her off because she's already struggling. She doesn't need my hands on her problem. She doesn't need any help making it worse. She's already doing fine on her own, just like I do. And so it kind of draws, I can talk about that honestly, and it's burst the bubble, which is often saying what I would have thought was wrong, waiting to be kind and tolerant by thinking I'm helping people, but I'm trying to people please, which Bill says is a major attribute of alcoholism and drug addiction. That I'm going to make it better by lying. No, I'm not, ever. I'm only creating a veneer that society has used so long that we are numb to what we're actually doing, thinking that that's the culture we've created. We're like yogurt, a culture of yogurt that's a little bit too cultured. It passed the point of being healthy and helpful. Turns rancid at a certain point. And actually, that's how alcohol is distilled.
Here we are in in this form of our human nature, having this sense, this instinct to be recognized by others, to have some position in society, some status, Bill talks about it and defines it in different ways. But this sort of need that we have to have a place in society, maybe be recognized for it, to be acknowledged for it. We can make up all kinds of things that we would think would make that instinct fulfilled. And then I go and make up a story about what that is, where I should fit in. Then I struggle through all of the decisions about, should I go to school or not go to school? Do I need to get a certain kind of career or job or a certain amount of money, or what is it going to take? What clothes should I wear? Where should I go? Who should I be with? What kind of language should I be speaking? And so that I can fit in to an idea of where I'm supposed to be. And I already have a place. I am physically in a place. I am mentally in a place. I'm physically in a body that may have certain limitations. I may have a lack of, at the moment, a lack of capacity to maybe travel or go some different place. I may have limitations of maybe not being able to speak, or not being able to speak a language that I think I should speak, or whatever it is. And so I really concoct a life out of all these ideas. And then I wind up at some place that seems like it would be satisfying. I get there and it either is or isn't satisfying. Then I have to construct another idea of where I fit and keep moving. Where I've lived in a bunch of different cultures, and I've lived in places where it was 60 below zero, and I've been in a place where it's 100 degrees every day. I've lived in places that were crowded and places that were in the country. I've had a job working with machines and jobs working with people. I've had a job where I don't see anybody. I've had a job where I'm constantly battered by things. And I somehow have always had this instinct that I need to fit in. And sometimes I felt like I fit right in, and sometimes I didn't feel like I fit in. Sometimes I feel like I fit in and that forces outside me are pushing me out of where I should be. And then sometimes I just seem to come right back to center. And nobody can push me off of where I think I should be. And in fact, as you were saying earlier, I am in the center. I am in this right spot. Whatever spot I'm in it's up to me and my thinking about whether that spot is sufficient to fulfill my instinct. How Bill talks about how we warp these instincts out of proportion. Yes. I begin to think that I really need things, or that I even convince myself I want things that I have to really contort to get to. And it seems that leads to sometimes immense disappointment. It leads to unfulfilled fantasies and all kinds of things. And it's just
everything.
Yes, it's a tortuous state.
So that's, Douglas, you're here for the second time. I think we met after a meeting I spoke at 2 weeks ago, Friday, and Matthew was there and Loretta was there, and Dee Dee, I believe, is your wife.
Yeah,
she was there, and Susan Hart, I think, stayed afterwards. We talked about this a little bit, but my sense is that Bill was referring to instinct as being the instinct of the brain when we're obsessed with a thought. And the instinct of the
brain when we're obsessed with a thought.
Jackie, are you muted?
Oops, sorry about that.
But it's good to hear from you. So if we've contorted what instinct is designed to help us survive, and what's interesting about instinct is that if we're in a situation that is so threatening, we don't think about what to do. We know exactly what to do. And yet you're describing a sort of thinking that is constantly trying to solve what to do, but never seems to solve it. And wherever it ends up, it always seems to be out of balance because it's based on the idea that the obsessive thinking is a natural state, which it isn't. This has been missed through history, as far as I can tell, from the beginning. If you look at the story of Adam and Eve in the garden with the first two kids born, one kills the other. And God comes to Cain and says, "Where's your brother?" And he goes, "I don't know." He lies. He's lying to God. That's a pretty good impression that thinking was considered to be so superior and so supreme and so reliable that God wouldn't know better. It's exactly what we do when we make believe that these things are true. Now, you're describing society, Douglas, in terms of trying to fit in. So if there's nothing more creative that we know about in the universe right now, and there's no computer greater than our own brain. The capacity of our mental capacity and our physicality and the ability of our body to function is so intricate and so detailed and so magnificent in relation to anything that it can be compared to. And yet it's apparently not enough. We need a better job. We need a better house. We need something else. Why? Because we're relying on what we think rather than who we are and what we are. And when we miss that, we literally become missing in action in terms of the thoughts we have. And we think that those forces out there, I would suggest when you felt that pushback that you thought was happening to you, we're manifesting those circumstances to give us perspective. And if you begin looking at those things as things you're doing, you start valuing them as information that you're creating to offer yourself mental perspective. And rather, my sense is that we generally break off relationships with two pairs of two words: thank you or fuck you. And the difference is when I look at what somebody's done to give me the chance to see what I'm doing by thinking it's them, and I'm seeing that clearly, I'm thanking them for that. And when I say you're hurting my feelings, you're causing me to you're toxic, and I can't be with toxic people. And I remind people, nobody would be resistant to toxic people who weren't toxic. Because there's no greater impact that anyone can have on their experience than what we think. Diamonds cut diamonds for a reason. Thought cuts thought for a reason. And if the immediacy of our experience here is so great and we deny it, we're going to think things out there hurt us more as an excuse. It's impossible. There is no lag in the hurt that we create from the thoughts we're maintaining in our own brain, because our brains are designed to register pain. And pain is not something that confirms reality. It confirms that something is wrong. It's a guidance system. So if I'm suffering mental anguish, I'm suffering the awareness that something is wrong. And if I think what's wrong is right, I have now decided to suffer more in the name of what's right, which would obviously be wrong. And that would certainly not be aligned, but certainly be a natural clash of titans. And why are they titans? Because it's the same thought. Thinking the thought that I'm thinking about is so powerful as to even have anything to fight. Rather than simply giving me the awareness that in this universe that we're experiencing this physicality, I'm perfectly designed to know what's useful and what's not. And when I struggle and think I need to overcome the struggles, I'm actually committing to failure and wondering why I'm failing, and then using the blame and fault on the economy and all the people involved rather than see that I'm the source of that manifestation. So people talk about manifestation all the time. They always talk about it in regards to what they want that they don't have. Why? Because we don't think we're doing what we're doing. We think it's happening to us, not by us. So my contention is we're manifesting everything all the time because we're looking at it from a perception that's based on how we think it is rather than how it is. And when you see it how it is, Anthony, as you were referring to earlier, when you start letting it be how it is, you have no opinion about it. It doesn't matter. It's how it is. You can say, well, it is how it is. That's it. I don't need to think about it any more than that to know that it's how it is. Yeah. Right? Now, that's a pretty stable thought compared to what is it? I need to think about this more. I need to define it more. What I need to do is write an encyclopedia about a definition about this that is so thorough and so complete that nobody will ever even be able to read it because it'll be too long to even bother with.
But it does give you the impact of something without having any substance to it. There's really, everything's just kind of no salt. But the salt is when you give it some meaning, and that's your.
But if it has no meaning, Anthony, if it has no meaning other than how we give it, what we give it, it has no meaning. And get used to that. The universe isn't running around with an attitude trying to convince us that it's really great, and it needs our vote to vote for it and say, yeah, you're the best, man. Yeah. It's saying, look, this is all that is. And it's not even saying that. It just is all that is. And if you want to avoid it and think thinking is going to somehow preoccupy yourself sufficiently to be better than it, be my guest. I love you enough to give you that latitude.
Yeah.
But what's going to come with that are consequences to confirm you're wrong. And the longer humanity has basically been trying to pretend it's better by being wrong less visibly. And what have we done? Created obvious wrongs that we don't even claim we're responsible today, that were directly resulting from industrial pollution and all kinds of other stuff. If we can't talk about it openly, there's some indication we're lying about it privately. So talking about it would seem to be natural, but is it? No, because it inflames people and people react and people, I have people on this tell me to get fucked multiple times and hang up.
Do you know what Bill meant when he said quit fighting everything and everyone?
He probably meant quit fighting everything and everyone.
And himself.
Well, that would be everything and everyone within the context of what he said.
Yeah, I never looked at it like himself, too. I always think it is always everyone and everything. It's not everyone else. It's himself was the problem.
So, but the thing to see here, Anthony, and my sense is, to your point about admiration, Douglas, wanting social context to fit in, wanting to be admired, you've read the emotional sobriety letter that he wrote. So what does he say in there? He said when he realized that he was looking for admiration as a source of his own satisfaction, that he had a false dependency. What would be false about it? It's not dependable because there isn't anything there. He's searching for something in it. And he said when he finally cut those away, he started to have a sense of freedom that was beyond everything else. And he said, the pioneers of AA someday will start to see this. He saw this as the source of addiction. He was glimpsing it in that letter that he wrote. And that's what we're talking about now. So if he has any legacy, we have that legacy. We are the conduits of what he knew and what he did as a result of everything he did being with us now, in addition to everything everyone else did, Frank Buckman and all the other characters that played into the evolution of what he eventually took the pieces and parts of, William James and Dr. Silkworth and all these characters that added little tidbits that made definable something that had never been defined accurately enough to be reliable. And if we are here and starting to rely on what's accurate and reliable, it shouldn't take long to see impacts that are dramatically different than the ones we create, thinking we need to think of it right to get there when we can simply concede we're already there and we already know it. And everyone must know this and everything knows it. The irony is we think we're superior because we can think. And yet we've turned thinking against us to be almost the only species that's actually created its own extinction. That's a trick. That's a job. That's a job really well done. In every other case, it's happened as a confluence of events that were out of the control of the species, that they just happen to be a part of. The comet hitting the Earth with the dinosaurs, they didn't all get together and said, let's fuck this up. I'm tired of being a dinosaur. It just happened. We are causing it directly as a consequence that clearly indicates we have some things to notice in our own environment and are not talking about honestly from our own perspective. And I would say that is a major fault, and almost every transition of thought that has dispelled the rumors that culture has believed in and fought for has held individuals out as being heretical, and we basically burned them, assassinated them, nailed them to crosses for even mentioning it. That doesn't seem very productive for a species to kill its own simply because they don't think alike. Pretty odd when we're designed to think whatever we want. Of course we don't think alike. If we did, we'd be completely bored with each other rather than pretending we're bored when it's actually bored with our own self repeating the same shit all the time. The personal potential in sobriety is recognizing our own hopelessness because we've been hoping for something that's hopeless. There is no hope in something that's hopeless. It's ridiculous. It's like something that's faithless. A lie has no substance. You can't have faith in it to turn it into truth. It's always going to end up short. So all these things we've been doing and thinking to finally get there are all based on lies that have no basis. And to admit it is to start to notice the freedom we have now not to continue in that direction. We can. We're free to. It's absolutely free for each of us to continue to maintain all the misery as proof that something's wrong with us or the world. And we can think of it in that way rather than say, oh, that's evidence that I'm doing something right now that's wrong. I can live with that. I've been living with it under the misery and weight. Why can't I live with it with the freedom? And isn't it interesting that the one thing that reassures us is the one thing we're unwilling to do, when the one thing that's never assured us is the one we're willing to continue to repeat? That's insanity, and it's a sickness. So within the realm of being responsible, it is absolutely possible to be irresponsible, because a loving nature does not constrict us in any way and did not say, you're only going to behave certain ways, and if you don't, I'm going to kill you. That's what humans have decided God is, to be able to justify our own unwillingness to accept the responsibility that we naturally have. We've done that as an excuse. That's a story we tell. Imagine an infinite source asking us to kill its own creation in the name of misbehavior. I love misbehavior. There's so much more freedom in recognizing we can do it rather than we shouldn't or can't or have to do something else. And all of a sudden the choice just becomes illogical, because you say, why would I want to repeat this when it's never worked? You start seeing with clarity and perspective what we've always known. And the denial of that notion is what causes grief and mourning and this sense of shame that is abiding. We're grieving the witness and observatory capacity we have of that awe and exploration, and the amazing capacity we have to conceive of things and imagine things. We've turned imagination in the exact backward direction. That's sick. Yeah. Taken one of our greatest resources and turned it into making believe that fantasy is reality.
I work and help to create an industry here in this part of the world that has to work under certain constricts of the law, has to work under the pressures of markets and so forth, and group thinking, of world thinking about how things are going. But each individual person involved in the business in this field contributes to the success of the others, or tends to detract from the success of the others. And so what we've done is tried to formulate a set of goals or principles or ways of acting that bring everyone together and help to protect everyone in the buyers and sellers and agents and people in this industry that are all kind of moving towards the same goal of one person coming, another going, one buying, one selling, and so forth. And everyone has these agreements that they make to be part of that. And yet there are people who, through some idea of superiority, or their need, supposed need, or selfishness, or whatever it might be, are just totally willing to ignore all conventions and agreements made, and act outside those and outside the law and outside of it to try to get in it some sort of advantage, to wind up with more of something, either money or prestige or whatever it might be. And virtually always, I mean, there's always a way that things are going to get done or they're going to not get done. And almost always that struggle to try to get more than my share, or to try to move others aside so that I can have, almost always causes everyone to lose and degrades the whole of the society. And so the idea that somehow that I deserve what I deserve, or what I think I deserve, or what I want, or what I think I want, is more important than bringing everyone along and being part of it all. and respecting everyone else, it almost always hurts everyone. Eventually, maybe not right away, but eventually it starts to try to ripple and disrupt.
I would say it's immediate.
Yeah, it's pretty immediate.
Yeah.
And
it
what
just takes us time to admit it.
Right. And so we make rules and we make punishments and we try to impose these sort of
right.
Even it comes sometimes almost to humiliations on people for things that they might do that are harming everyone eventually or right away. And we try to, people who are acting outside of principles tend to invite that retribution or whatever it might be from the others.
Yes.
And then they rebel and say, well, you shouldn't have ever had those rules in the first place. And then everyone's time, energies are all spent on this debate over whether it's good to be honest, over whether it's good to be thoughtful and kind or fair or whatever it is. So there's no, it seems that there are certain agreements that people have to have in order to deal with other people. We have to have some agreements. So, and we have our own ideas.
Yeah.
And we can create new ways of dealing with each other. But it seems that there are certain minimum standards that we have to follow.
So within the context of this conversation, it's to start to realize that we don't have to agree, believe, have faith in, trust in, or think about reality at all for reality to be real and for truth to be true. It's starting to see that this... Because what Bill Wilson referred to, I used to call it passive anarchy until I heard him use the term benign anarchy.
Benign, yeah.
The organization of AA was based on benign anarchy because all of the people who are the members are in charge. They're the CEOs effectively. And the president is just a figurehead. So he has no authority. He can't change anything. It's all the individuals that actually are. That's how we're designed. That's why that works in AA. The traditions work because Bill was looking at nature. We're already all in charge of everything. We're just embarrassed by the things we've done to want to take credit for it. And so we want to take more credit for things we do right than credits that's actually due, because it would be natural for us to do anything right. And it wouldn't take credit for that because we've already been built on that system.
Right.
So ultimately, you know what the utopian ideal of anarchy is? Love. Because there's no rules needed in a loving environment. Everybody knows. My contention is that, think of the word selfish. It's kind of like self-ish, generally attached to another word, sort of suggests kind of. It's kind of like self because it isn't really self. It's kind of like self. So self-ish is thinking the self that we are is the only thing that exists. And as a result, all we need is what we think it needs, rather than start to see that we already have everything. Everything on the planet's always been here while we've been arguing over it. Everything. There's never been any lack. And if there was any lack, it was well beyond the needs that any of us would have. So to consider that what we needed to do was have so much more than we ever need is where the lack in what seems to be scarce occurs. The abundance is there. So laws are just examples of the fact that we don't know how to function properly.
Right.
We haven't come to terms with it. And we think the laws and the division of all that stuff are going to somehow help, when in fact, what do? The same thing. They overdo what they're trying to do. They create whole cultures of people that have been so brutalized that they're not interested in social causes at all, because they're going to do whatever they need to get what they want the way they want. And we've actually fostered that industry. Right now with drugs, the war on drugs has... I am embarrassed to have done coke when it was the most expensive and the least pure. If I had just waited 30 years to today, after the 30-year, 40-year war on drugs, I could have bought it for less money. Even in today's economy, it's less money. Inflation hasn't even hurt the coke industry. We have more coming in at a purer rate than ever came before as a result of the war. Why? The industry that's created to enforce it depends on it succeeding, not failing.
That's right.
Just like the medical industry. In China, in years back in China, you paid your attorney and doctor as long as you were out of legal trouble and healthy. And as soon as you got into legal trouble, you stopped paying them. And as soon as you got sick, you stopped paying them. What was the incentive? To get you better. What do we do now? The opposite. We pay fortunes to maintain diseases. Probably could be solved if there was any incentive, but the incentive is marginalized and undermined by the commercial benefit.
Now the cartels have discovered that it's much more, it makes much more sense to make employees out of the authorities.
Yeah.
And if you want to open a store on a back street downtown here, and they'll have a store with just a door, you walk into a room, there's an ice chest full of harder drugs and maybe heroin, and there's meth, and there's coke, and there's in different forms, and there's marijuana, whatever you want, in these different ice chests, and you just walk in, and there's a cop out in front guarding the place, collecting the money at the end of the day.
Right.
And it's like, well, yeah, without a problem, you can't contrive a solution, which then exacerbates the problem, and they both just feed on each other. And
So
that happens in our mind.
What we're talking about here is starting to see that any disease that's misdiagnosed will get worse, period. And society doesn't understand addiction because society is filled with an addiction to thinking that what they're doing is right. So what's happening? The problems are getting worse. Suicides at an all-time high. Addictions at an all-time high. Overdoses are at an all-time high. These homicides of people thinking the best thing they can do is go into an elementary school and kill 20 people to make a name for themselves. That's pretty sick. I would say that wouldn't qualify on the actual chart of trying to get admiration, but simply trying to seek attention. That's pretty sick. But it's happening at all-time rates, and we're talking about it as some strange confluence of events when it's an absolute consequence of the same thinking. And if we're sick,
manifestation.
It's a manifestation. Exactly.
Said that too. We're always manifesting whatever is in our thinking, whatever's in our mind.
So if we're wrong in the assessment, wrong in the diagnosis, it's kind of like trying to talk the mirror out of changing the clothes you don't like seeing yourself in. And that would say, it's laughable, but yet we're doing it. Internationally, right now, as human beings, that's exactly what we're doing. We're trying to deny the image by thinking somehow we'll put this patchwork effort together and ignore it and think it'll get better, while in fact it's getting worse. What's it saying? You might want to pay some attention here. Might. You don't have to.
Is this the line, when judging ourselves by our intentions, whereas people will judge us by our actions?
I would say our actions are our intentions to stop the argument. And the sickness about that is seeing that we will act on things we think are absolutely right and then disclaim responsibility for them because we don't like the consequence, when in fact we're relying on sick thought and the consequence was inevitable for the action we took.
There was a guy he was my sponsor for a while here in this group here. And he said, I'm not responsible for my thoughts. I'm only responsible for my actions. And I said, I don't get that. And I don't, if either I have to change my mind or you have to change your mind in order for us to agree on that.
Well, again, I think
I'm not sure that I can outlive my thoughts.
Yeah, well, you're pointing to the fact that this misdiagnosis has been a condition of thinking that thoughts just happen to us rather than we may not have any control over thinking because it comes with the body, just like it's like trying to get a car without an engine. Wouldn't make much sense to go to the dealer and say, why does this car have an engine? Every car I buy has an engine. I don't want a car with an engine. Our brain is part of the engine of our body, right? It's the basic guiding. It's navigating. It's comparing, contrasting, analyzing, weighing. It's judging for us, right? It's designed to be part of our body. For us to think about that is something, it came with the body, right? So we got a body, we got the brain, we got the thoughts. The content of the thought, I would say, we can definitely claim responsibility for. And why do we end up discontent? Because we want to deny the content of the thinking we're doing. That's one of the basic irritability, restlessness, discontent. What's the irritability? I keep doing the same thing with my thinking and it fails, and I keep thinking somehow more thinking is going to solve it. I'm irritated with myself. I'm upset internally, inner conflict, emotional turmoil. All those things are happening consequentially to that thinking, that line of thinking. So rather than debate whether or not, my sense is bodies come with thoughts. How our body came along is, what I know is that it came along. And what I know is that trillions and trillions of interactions occurred to make that happen for each of us. And for us to be here alone is confirmation of belonging here. To even think about whether we belong comes from the capacity given by the existence we have that we belong. We have missed the simplest, obvious. I've been reading Heidegger, the German philosopher. I've been reading Being and Time. And he said to contemplate being is to begin to notice that the fact that we're even contemplating it is an indication that there's an awareness, that there's a question to be asked about it. So what's the question in sobriety? Am I a drug addict? Am I an alcoholic? Am I a sexaholic? Am I an overeater? Am I a gambler? Am I a debtor? Am I a whatever it is? All those different qualifications for compulsions, symptoms, are what all the 150 different 12-step programs represent, or however many there are. But it's a lot, right? So underlying every one of those is a thought that something can happen that can't happen. And as long as I maintain that thought, I'm going to try to prove through my compulsions that I'm right because I'm wrong, not because I'm right. Righteousness is never right. It's always a function of trying to cover up for something wrong, because rightness is natural. I don't need to think about it for it to be right. Everything that works in the universe works right now. And I started to go off in the direction earlier, talking about our body and our experience. We don't bother to even notice that inanimate objects that we think are inferior to our capacity to think, in the thinking that we've allowed ourselves to get to the point where we could potentially extinct our own species, those things in the universe, everywhere that those things are, including our bodies, the makeup of our bodies, the molecular chemical structure, atoms, all of it, seem to know exactly what to do. And none of them seem to be fighting. And we undermine the potential of them doing what they're doing by diseased thinking and stress and anxiety, undermining the capacity of our metabolic, parasympathetic, cardiac systems, all the bodily systems that we have, to actually function properly. And if I remember right, going back in the Bible, they talked about people living 800 and 900 years. And we're now struggling to go 80. And thinking of that as some major thing because other countries are worse, and thinking that we're better as a result. Imagine coming to the conclusion that we're better off because other people are worse. That is pretty sick. In a loving environment, we'd be happier to know others are better off than we are. If we can take the hit, we take it.
Mm-hmm.
But this idea that somehow we get better by looking better and acting better. Think of the partying going on in the world today. What's the celebration? What are we celebrating? The ability to ignore all the wrong going on and pretend that there's something to celebrate. And there's a rush to the party. Goes on day after day, night after night. I know it's fun, but does it excuse the weight of wanting to create that fun to avoid the actual magnificence and awed nature of existence that is so spontaneous and so exploratory? It's such an adventure that we've thought the best thing we can do is to completely alter our experience to deny the one we're actually having and make believe that's the best thing we can do. That is a pretty sick concept for a species. And The talking about it, my experience is starting to admit when you were talking about other people and what they do, is starting to see that they too have this absolute nature. It's what they're doing with it that they're struggling with. And if I'm thinking of them as separate from me, I am helping reinforce those individuations that they're maintaining as idiosyncratic. Even in my own daily meditation and awareness of them, I'm ending up feeding that grid of anxiety and stress and helping create the environment that they use to justify doing more of it, rather than create the peace and the tranquility and the space for them to have greater perspective. Whoever they are, wherever they are, Bill's original 12 steps said, tried to carry this message to others. He didn't say alcoholics. And he didn't think of this message as something limited to alcoholics, but other people may benefit from our way of life too, because he was mentioning that other people actually have the exact same possibility. When he was laying in the hospital bed, he saw the world is capable of benefiting from that thought, because it was principled and clear enough to give him that vision immediately, because that was the manifestation of his realization that this thing could be carried one person to the other, because everybody already had the answer. I don't know that he saw it in those terms exactly, but he started to witness it and had an assurance. It's kind of like in the meeting we were in. Several people said, I don't understand what you're talking about, but I feel something's right. That feeling is the awareness of our awareness that's right. That's all it is. We don't, to try and make sense out of it is to convolute it rather than simply say, wow, I have an absolute present awareness that is pretty awesome. And if that's the case and everybody else has that too, it certainly begins to dismantle all the ideas I tend to think about what's wrong with everyone else that prevents me from thinking there's something we can do collectively on the highest, most productive level, rather than in this disjointed way of thinking somehow the laws and legislature is going to figure it all out, when in fact they're confirming the wrong we're doing by not addressing it, but they're addressing the symptoms, just like we addressed our own symptoms by drinking. If I treat a symptom, I'm not getting to the disease. If I look at the disease, I start seeing that the basic responsibility I have is absolute. It isn't divided. It isn't separate. It isn't yours. It isn't mine alone. It's ours. And to see that is to start to actually look at a way of functioning that's considerably different than what I make believe that somehow or another other people are idiotic enough not to have this, when in fact they can do idiotic things and still have this absolute power, sense, awareness, knowing.
Sounds like a cult a little bit.
You're the leader, Anthony. You're the leader of that cult that it sounds like. I'll put you in charge. You've taken charge, so you got it. If we already have it, it doesn't take organization because we're already organized. If we already have it, it doesn't take order because nature's order already exists. The laws of nature already exist. I heard a quote this morning, John Stuart Mills, about something about we can't conquer nature, but we can certainly obey it. And we've been trying to conquer nature through history and trying to overcome it and trying to destroy it in the name of thinking we're getting better, when in fact we're undermining the whole future potential. We always talk about the kids being our future, and yet we keep leaving them a future that's worse than the one before. That tells me the adults are not maturing, but they're getting bitter, and there's no sweetness in bitterness. And we're actually giving kids worse and worse. Suicide amongst kids today is now at the highest rate it is in single-digit kids, 9 and 10 years old. How impressed do you have to be with a sense of failure and hopelessness to kill yourself at that age and think the best thing you can do is just exit quicker than later?
I was looking at it.
That's our doing and our thinking causing that environment. It's not something disjointed from us at all. That's a manifestation of exactly what we are each creating as a collective, all of us.
I was watching a TED Talk. This lady was talking about the economy, and she said that her basic premise is that we should be operating our world economy in such a way that we thrive, not that just the economy grows, that we don't just do everything based on certain levels of incomes and accomplishments and so forth, and growth and getting bigger and more and doing whatever it takes to do that. destroying the nature, destroying our some people are going to suffer so that others rise up. So how can we all agree that every one of us only wants to thrive, that billions of dollars in a bank account does not allow me to thrive any more than the food that I'm eating today and the relationships that I have today.
Well, I'm happy to hear that you have that kind of money in the bank, Douglas.
No, I wish.
I'm kidding.
I wish
Listen,
that none of it. I wish that none of us did.
Do you know why economies constantly want to expand? It's like a business. If a business is making a lot of money, it hides a lot of the inefficiencies that would otherwise be obvious if it weren't making so much money. So that expansion you're talking about is a form of denial of thinking that you do it. You constantly expand the economy at all costs to overlook the inefficiencies of that economy, which are not economical.
Precisely.
They're deficient, they're abusive, they're wasteful, they're contemptful, they're corrupt, they're pollutants, all that stuff. It means cut corners at all costs, pretend you're doing something great and providing people something great, but don't give it to them. Whatever you do, do not put that in the hands of that consumer, but give them the impression that's what they're getting. Think of customer service today.
Give them a little healthcare, or give them some free blankets or whatever it is.
Well, think of customer service. You wait 40 minutes to talk to somebody. That's a design to eliminate people from calling with complaints, because they know there's a certain fall off. That's not in favor of the consumer. That's not in favor of the people that actually make those businesses successful.
Right.
It's an attempt to reduce costs in the name of reducing, not look at the problems and say, let's fix these problems so we have less consumers calling, but how do we eliminate the complaints so that we can function at a higher level of profit? All of those things are dysfunctional.
So when we all begin to see that we're all part of each other and that we're all part of a greater, doing it now. A great continuum. Here we are.
We're doing it now.
When we all realize that, then we are supportive and help each other thrive. And I realize that when you thrive, I thrive. Yes. When it's kind of that.
Survive and thrive is the instinct.
Exactly.
That's the instinct, because we're not supposed to just take care of ourselves and be self-supporting. The goal is that we each have more than we need, so we have more to give away. That's the abundance. And that's where selfishness becomes altruism, because the best I can do is the best I can do. And if I'm doing the best I can do, it benefits everyone naturally. So we're already working in a continuum of interconnectedness. We're just doing it in a way that interreactiveness is at the core of the dysfunction that's going on, because we're each thinking it's our own effort that ultimately pays off and not everyone's cooperative effort. In Origin of the Species, Darwin said 13 times he referred to survival of the fittest, which is typically what we hear. 70 sometimes he said cooperation was at the root of any species' long-term success. Cooperation, almost 5 times mentioned, almost 5 times as many times, and almost never mentioned in our social conversation. Survival of the fittest, you hear all the time to justify knocking somebody off for the sake of your own success. And then we think those guys are stars. We don't even know how many stars there are, but we're creating new ones on Earth to prove how great we are. It's crazy. It's vanity, it's grandiosity, it's imagination on crack, wondering why we have an epidemic. It is an epidemic of thought that will never be right, and that we're perfectly willing to maintain if it's happening right now. Our choice is to have that happen now, to see it the way we do, to have it the way it is, and allow it to continue. And the beauty is that we all have the free will to choose not to participate at that level and see things in a way that divides and tries to conquer, when in fact division never conquers, because you can try to split 1 in half forever and you never get to the freedom of 0. It just gets, the fractions just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's all that our philosophies and theories about what should solve the problem are about. So an expanding economy is generally trying to cover up the ills of the economy, rather than look at it at the root and say it would normally expand to exactly the level of need so that nothing more would be No resource would be overtaken or overutilized because everyone would have everything that they needed rather than everything they think they want from a sick point of view that nothing is ever enough. That's how we've treated it. So that's us, you and I and everyone else participating at that level. That's the bounty of our capacity to have freedom to be so illogical and unreasonable and irrational and idiotic to think that that's the best we can do. And what we need to do is refine the idiocy, just get it a little better to really make it work. And it's the next thought based on those previous thoughts rather than seeing we're choosing it all right now, right now, right now, right now. So what's love? Freedom. No obligation whatsoever. There's no must shelves. There's no have tos. There's no can't do's. We can always do what we can do. Always do what we can do. And one of the things that's inherent in choice, I mean, you hear people say, I had no choice. And I said, well, then it wasn't a choice. Then why are you arguing over the choice? If it wasn't a choice, you would have just done the thing and there's no choice. But choice always allows not to be chosen. In addition to all other possibilities, including things that are impossible, not choosing is what choice is about. And so there's freedom, once again. And to think otherwise, again, pins the tail on thinking is the problem, not reality and truth that offers us that option not to choose, always. And that's recovery. Recovery from drugs and alcohol is seeing that we can think about it, but we have no compelling reason or need to do it because we now have regained perspective that if we make that choice, we know what the consequence is going to be rather than think like we used to. Certainly this time will be different. Certainly I know enough now to figure out how to have the consequence different than the one I've constantly faced, which is passing out, getting into trouble, spending more than I have, staying up too late, not being able to make it to work, all the other things that interfered with my functional capacity, all justified as being normal. And someday I'll conquer it rather than saying, oh, maybe if I don't drink and use, that would be a better premise than trying to refine the drinking and using. And what we're talking about is the obsessive thinking that gets us to the point of thinking the relief we need is in a drink or a drug, is in a drink or a drug or more and more and more and more and more of something that's never enough, is to start to see that that's the pinnacle, the center of the choice that causes all of the compulsions, all of the reactive impulsive behaviors to trigger dysfunctional manifestations. And they're all based on what we do now. Why? Because nothing ever happens other than the present. Nothing has ever happened at any other time than the present. There is no time in the present, which is why there is no time like the present, because there is no time in the present. It's absolutely infinitesimally individuated from any other thing because it's always present. It's always beginning. It never gets old, so it can't be in time. It's always present. It's always new. What does that mean? All that's possible is always possible where we are. Always, always, always. And starting to remember that absolute things are absolute and truth is true and real is real, Anthony, just going back to that, as you're starting to struggle with thoughts, you'll have a clarity that the struggle is simply coming from what you're thinking, not from reality or truth, that you're not struggling with reality or truth. Your life is not threatened. But the bodily functions are threatened by the thinking we're doing because the body is, in fact, containing the thoughts that are being created. That's what's at risk, not our essence, not our whatever that spiritual. My suspicion is that spirit doesn't go around saying, I don't have any problems, I'm spiritual. It doesn't think, it knows. God doesn't say, wait a minute, you apparently didn't read the name tag. We've created a God that seems very human in my estimation. It's a he. He's always somewhere else. He doesn't answer our calls, doesn't answer our prayers, always seems to give other people more than we get. Contemptful if we don't behave. Sounds awfully human for us to assign to an absolute nature and then blame as a result of feeling we're inadequate when in fact the inadequacy is in the thinking we're doing. And you said earlier, Douglas, about thoughtfulness. Thoughtful means it has substance. Thoughtless means there's no substance. There's no thought. Like powerless, it doesn't mean less power. It means no power. Thoughtless means no thought. There is no thought in something that's non-substantive. So to think that it is what delusion is. To think it's there is what delusion is. The mirage never came true for anybody who struggled through the desert to get to the oasis they saw, ever. And wasn't it convenient that the only mirage people tended to see in the desert when they were struggling in heat and needed water was palm trees and water? The convenience of thought, not reality. If we can do that when our life depends on trying to be saved and end up doing the thing that ultimately kills us, that's real freedom. That is love. That is the freedom we're given to actually operate at the worst level and think it's the best level. And what's interesting in addiction, it's the thought that it's the only thing we can do that condemns us. There is nothing else because of all the stories we tell about everybody else and everything else and history and, well, nothing's going to change and everything's changing all the time. What do you mean nothing's going to change? Everything's constantly changing within this relative experience we're having, constantly. So to make believe these other things are true is to pit us against reality and truth and wonder why we feel displaced, when in fact it's the disconnected, unsubstantiated thinking we're doing that isn't even thinking because there's no thoughtful relation to it at all. It's literally just an idea of a thought that doesn't exist as being real and true, just like ego is the thought of who we think we are. When thinking thinks of itself, it thinks of a self born of thought. What is that? Does it die when we stop thinking about it? Apparently, which is what justifies constantly thinking about ourselves. If I stop thinking, I'm going to die. No wonder we're afraid. That's self-reliance. And self-reliance, I'm relying on a self that doesn't exist as being who I am. No wonder that's the source of fear. It is anxiety. Why? Because we know better. We absolutely know better. And to discount the experience we're having is to make believe it's the only thing we can continue doing and it's never going to change. And I'm just going to eke out my existence and die young and, hope that I'll feel better once I do. It's just crazy. Health is our nature. Healing is our nature. Homeostasis is the nature of bodies trying to maintain balance because they're constantly in imbalance. There was a great British economist back during during the Depression who said the US was always striving for equilibrium in the economy. And he said, equilibrium is something you pass from disequilibrium to disequilibrium. He said, you go past it. That's the center point you cross as things are moving. It's like a boat trying to constantly or a motorcycle, trying to maintain that upright condition when it's going through a turn. It naturally moves. The boat naturally wobbles. It's designed to do that. The course that's set is a function of relating to accurately the conditions that occur, not the weather report you originally got. It's making those adjustments as things happen. That's yogic thinking. That's beginning to be flexible rather than brittle in our thoughts and resistant in our thoughts and defensive of our thoughts. The flexibility is our nature because we're not committed to any of it. And we can think we're committed to all of it. We can think, Anthony, that something's important. And you know what matter does? Occupies space. And you know what it also does? Cast shadows. And you know what those shadows are? Doubt. Hi, Dee Dee. Shadows of doubt are the light obstructed by what we think matters. When we're in doubt, it's an accurate assessment of the thinking we're doing that we think is true and real. And we can feel better than we've ever felt and still be doing it to some degree. And if we aren't doing it at all, we still have the potential to do it now. That's the freedom, is starting to see it isn't something that gets fixed in a way we never do it and stop doing it and it'll never happen again. It's in beginning to see that we can always think about it. We can always act on that thinking with more thinking. And I would say thinking is the primary action. So to think that all we're doing are the acting out is missing the fact that all of that acting out is motivated by a thought. Every single bit of involuntary or voluntary action, it always stems from a thought, always. So that must be a primary action. So if we're trying to do contrary actions all the time by correcting the actions, the outward actions, and not dealing with the contrary thoughts that are causing those contrary actions, we're actually creating a new condition called denial, and it's a new addiction. We've gotten over drinking, and we constantly think it's about our behavior that we need to fix rather than see it's the thinking that's been the problem from the beginning.
The old act my way into right thinking story.
Well, and it's interesting that we would notice that we need to act another way than we think and not notice that we're thinking another way to begin with that isn't right. And just start to concede that and say, wow, I have the potential to do that all the time. And it's kind of like, yes, exactly. Easy. I do it all the time. I must do it 1,000 times a day. I don't know what the count is. I don't try to keep track of it, but I know when I'm veering. I can sense it. I can sense when my thoughts get heavy and I start getting attached to a point I'm trying to make. You know what a point is? No dimension. There's no perspective in a point. And you know what everybody wants you to hear when they're telling their lengthy stories that have almost nothing in them to be listening to? A point that they never get to. They're trying to make the point that their story is actually true and real. And if you understand it, they've got another vote in the universe that they're on. They've now only got 7,999,000 people to go to get consensus. There's no point. Even in mathematics, a point can't exist. Why? Because if it occupies any space, it occupies the space of other points. So it means you can't make a point. So our dysfunction is trying to focus on the one thing, thinking it, because our focus is narrow, it excludes everything else, when it wouldn't be any different than doing this all day and saying, God, I just can't see things straight anymore. I cover my face with my hands and blame the world for disappearing. When the mariners thought the horizon was doomed, they knew their thought was doomed and blamed it on the horizon. And you know what's ironic about that? There were whole thousands of years prior, people that already sailed around the world. They knew it was round. They'd already sailed. Kon-Tiki and Thor Heyerdahl and all those guys kind of proved the capacity of the boats to sail from South America to I forget where he ended up, but I forget the name of the island. You're still muted, Douglas.
Yeah, we're I think once I submit to the idea that the horizon can never be reached,
yes,
then seeking the horizon is not a fearful act, yet it is a futile act.
Well, what's interesting though, in approaching it, we begin seeing what was previously unseen and begin realizing that what is unseen, they say seeing is believing. Think of that. That means anything unseen is unbelievable. That means most everything that can be seen doesn't exist. That would be a pretty narrow view. Belief is a function of thought. If all of a sudden I realize that every inch I take toward that horizon, I see an inch more of what wasn't visible, I start realizing that everything that seemed invisible was always visible. I just wasn't looking at it.
Right.
That's it. Now I'm whole in my thinking because I'm not thinking of the limits as being limits, but actually the beginning of everything else.
Right.
And then realizing that they were never limits except in my thinking they were limits because they were wrong. I was defending them. The defense of limits is what maintains the limits. Why am I defending? I can't defend truth. It doesn't need it.
And the journey to the horizon is really only its great value is in the passage through all the things that are exposed in heading for the horizon. So in seeing the new worlds and seeing the new possibilities and the new expressions and manifestations of life in our case on our planet, all of these things add to an experience that then helps me to recognize that my thinking, the horizon of my thinking, I will never reach, but by expanding my thinking the point is I'm willing to grow, allows me to become more a part of everything that I see and more in a oneness with this continuum of everything that is. And my relationships with others began to become a more natural, a more natural contact than that former like fear of what was out there, and then preparing myself in defense for what I'm going to get to, and then arriving at it and going, I'm here to defend myself. And then the person on the other edge of the horizon says, you don't need to. We're all here. You're just coming, you're passing through. Let's go together.
We see things in two ways. One is visibly, which is probably our primary sensation between the five senses. There's almost 13 senses, I think, now identified by physicists that go beyond the five. So we have a greater sense of awareness, even in our own body, that's recognized. But understanding is the other seeing that we do. Mm-hmm. And the understanding, if I can't see something and begin realizing that it doesn't mean it's not there if I'm not seeing it, that's a level of seeing and understanding that begins to concede that things are how they are, regardless of what I see and think. That they just are what they are. And if the primary basis of my existence is an absolute knowing source, there are no limits in that whatsoever, nor can they be, but to the thinking I do about that state. So the imposition of thoughts makes impressions, and that impressions get depressing as I maintain those thoughts as truth and reality. They add up over time, because I'm bearing it. But really what I'm doing is repeating the same old thing. And I'm so disgusted with myself for trying to repeat something that's never worked, is thinking it will if I just keep repeating it. I'm now the droning voice that I hate listening to in my own head. I'm doing the same thing. So if our greater awareness is absolute, and I would say if that's the fundamental nature of our experience, that we as humans have taken thinking to be the primary source of our solution rather than knowing and realizing there's never been a problem at all. None. That they've all come from thinking. And all the limit, there is no thought I have that's limited that I'm not defending because I know it's not true. It's just a thought. And as I start saying it's just a thought, all of a sudden I can have another thought. We can think again, by the way, right? What can we think? Then I start saying, all I've been doing is repeating the same 6 thoughts so long, thinking it has a sense of permanence when it's my own insistence that it persists. So my own resistance to reality and truth is what's persisting, and I'm sick and tired of myself and everyone else as a result. And I think the world's difficult and impossible because it's impossible for me to convert that into reality and truth, not because reality and truth doesn't exist. It's because it's already in perfect order. It doesn't need any help or my thoughts at all. I am a byproduct of it, designed to express it, not to conclude it. It's not up to me to get better. I don't have to go anywhere to know that everywhere is available to be gone. It's very freeing. Now everything I do is a choice. And I say, well, yeah, I ended up, if I'm in a place I don't like, I chose to be here. I must like not liking things to do things I claim not to like. And all of a sudden it starts making it fills, if the glass is half empty, it's still full of half air. Right? It's still full. It's just not all full of air. And when my thoughts are all I'm thinking, they're full of air, nothing else. There's no substance there. There's nothing. The substance is air. It's see-through. It doesn't have any real, it's just a thought. So delusion is thinking that what we're thinking is true and real when thinking is never truth and reality, but always has the capacity to express truth and reality because it isn't concluding truth and reality, because love is the nature we're already sharing. And now we're actually witnessing that availability because we're accessing it within thinking and starting to let thinking melt into something that's fluid rather than defined by all the limitations we've set on it and made believe somehow we'd get them all right, get this top heavy thing someday to stand up properly and not tip over. So it's just a reminder that the essence of who we are is, by the way, essential. It isn't negotiable. It isn't a choice. It isn't an option. It's just who we are, period. That's it. And that's freeing because it has nothing to do with what I think. And now I'm free to think anything I want and never be condemned by any of it or think I need to be condemned to prove that somehow it's right. I'm not up against a hateful creator, by the way, that comes from here. That hateful, spiteful God has been the ego I've been worshiping as who I am and who I think I am, and has ended up thinking that is the God that I'm actually worshiping when it's actually all come from my own thinking the whole time. And my sense is Bill was on it. He struggled with it, and he admitted the struggle, and he gave us a chance to let his legacy, to be his legacy, and to express what he saw in relation to alcohol, in relation to everything, all of it. All of it. He wasn't talking in absolute and unlimited and infinite terms, omnipotent terms, all-powerful terms, because he was thinking of something as an option. He said, completely abandon yourself. That's like if the boat's at the bottom of the ocean and you're bailing water, giving up would probably relieve you of something that can never be done. He's admitting, he says, let go absolutely. That doesn't leave a lot of room for what he really means is hang on to my shit and try to get it cleaner so that it doesn't smell and wonder why I still feel full of shit and do shitty things. He's not saying that. He's saying let go absolutely. The result was nil, no result until we let go absolutely. What is he really saying? In my estimation, if it's delusional, we've never been doing the thing we thought we were doing. We just thought we were doing the thing we were doing. And the more I keep thinking about the thing I think I'm doing, the more I keep thinking the thing I'm doing is the only thing happening. That's insanity. So I would say the world is struggling with a mental health issue. And if it's mentally ill, all illness fractures off of that fractured state of thinking. I can divide 1 in half and somehow I'll get to the freedom of 0. And what do I get? More, you know what we call those numbers, by the way, that go on forever? Irrational. Like pi, it goes on forever. Everybody wants to live forever, but we call numbers that go on forever irrational. Why? Because it's probably not forever and it's probably not eternal. It's ever present. Ever meaning now, always present, where we are, accessible now, here, not somewhere else, not somewhere else, not with someone else, not with something else. It's just the natural state we've been operating on the whole time. And the proof of it is the dysfunction is an actual representation of our knowing nature simply acting as though we don't know. That's it. If knowing isn't something that can be negotiated, then we absolutely know what we know. And we would feel shame and regret and guilt and doubt and less worth, less value, less esteem, acting like we don't in thought. Those would be natural consequences that are accurate assessments. So what do we try to do? Overcome them, outrun them. Why? We're addicted to them, thinking the only thing we can do is get away from them rather than see the getting away is happening within the thinking that's trying to get away. It's crazy, loony. And we laugh, as you're doing, Douglas, and smile about it from the perspective of getting that rather than being in the middle of it when you think it's so pitiful and demoralizing. The best thing you can do is kill yourself and just end it all and consider those thoughts. Think about our willingness to kill our body, but not let go of the thought that's killing us. And you know what the irony is? There is no life in something that's delusional to even live, much less die. The self we're trying to kill never had any life. That's the insanity about it. That's the egomania about it. There's nothing wrong with having an ego. They're just roles we take on like an actor on a stage. But if the movie ends and we think we've died, we think we're that character. We forget that we took on those characteristics. And when we think they're who we are, they become defective characteristics, defects of character. Why? Because we think what we've made up is our makeup. Overlooking the actual makeup we have wasn't made up because it's always existed. It's always been what it is. That infinite source can't start and end. It's just present. It's always beginning. It doesn't end. Glad to see you, Dee Dee. And Doug?
Yeah, thank you. I was just sharing on another meeting, so it's nice to see you. I love listening to you. I'll tell you why I love listening to you. You talk about this reality for me that it is not so hard. I always think thinking could be more of a male problem than it is a woman's problem. I don't know. But what sometimes Doug goes on and on. I go, I'm not even thinking what you're thinking. I just look at what's going on now and move forward. And I've been doing a lot more studying right now into Buddhism and talking about and really studying it. And a lot about what you're talking about to me is not self, where it's not that I am this, I am that. It's what's happening all that's happening is right now for me. What's happening for me is right now. And if I
for everyone,
yes. And if I get, but I mean, I can only see from my point of view right now.
Well, no. If understanding is a function of seeing, you can also see that anything that's actually happening in reality is happening for everything and everyone, everything that exists and everyone that exists, everything, every molecule, every speck. We don't have to see it to know that. And there's the freedom in starting to witness this knowledge we have is speaking of it in general enough terms that we don't rely on our five senses to conclude it, because we're starting to recognize our knowing nature isn't thinking at all. It simply knows. And one of the ways to do it in thought is just say things that are absolutely true. Truth is true. Right? That's pretty easy. Wrong is wrong. What's interesting is when wrong is wrong, it becomes right. You can align with it. You can express it. You can correct it. You don't feel condemned by it because you're letting it be what it is. And you know what things are right now? What they are, regardless of what I think. Everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So my thinking becomes inconsequential to all that. And yet I can start seeing that all I make are choices and face consequences as a result of those choices. And when I do, honestly, I'm responsible for those consequences and say, wow, I didn't think I'd get here. This is fascinating. Something happened well beyond my own cognitive mental capacity, and yet I'm witnessing that capacity expressing itself. That can be fascinating rather than feel like, oh shit, things didn't go the way I wanted. I had a shitty day. When things don't go the way I want them to go, they're generally going better than I could have thought. Most of the time. There's something in it that I'm not learning when I think they aren't going better and shouldn't be what they are. And when I'm learning, I'm witnessing the absolute wisdom of this knowing nature expressing itself, and my own unwillingness to actually admit it and concede it and absorb what's happening in my thinking and introduce it to my thinking is something that's a valued education of life rather than something I need to escape and run from.
And that's a pretty big shift from Doug's wife saying that she can't possibly see everything through everyone's eyes to accepting that she can see that shift. Right? That's a big
understanding is our greater sense of seeing. So understanding, actually, our eyes literally tend to see things according to what we think they are. When you look at a refrigerator, you don't generally say, that's an ox. I better get out of the room. Right? So we see it according to what we think.
Not since I stopped drinking, I haven't.
The other thing too, Dee Dee, to consider, and I don't have much clarity on this, but I've done my best to think of it in the clearest terms, is that my sense is that, and Laura Alice helped me see this at one point, because she was talking about feeling being a quicker sensory organ for her than thinking. Her first awareness is feeling. And my sense is that thinking and feeling are simultaneous. Because if we think we hate something, we tend not to feel good about that thing.
Right.
And if we think we like something, we tend to feel better about that thing. And if we tend to like something a lot, we tend to want that more of that thing, right? So the feeling about it tends to be simultaneous. And she and I had a little debate over it. And then I started realizing cause and effect is simultaneous. Up and down is simultaneous. All these present factors are simultaneous in an absolute sense. And what I think of it doesn't make sense if all I'm trying to do is have it become what I think, rather than say, that's a choice. How I'm seeing it, how I'm thinking of it. That's a thought I have. So when people tell me they don't like me, I say, that's a thought. Thank you. They're sharing honestly what they're thinking. They're not sharing an assessment of who I am, because who I am is who they are and what all things are. That's who we are. The I is capitalized, by the way, even in our own language in the middle of a sentence, right? If that's who we are individually, that's who we all are collectively. It isn't something that's divided or divisible. It's something that's absolute and complete and whole as it is now. What we share. So what do we have to express? What we have to express isn't something we have to express. Think of the word we've bastardized, have, making it a demand, making it a must, making it a should, I have to have something. Help me untwist my thinking about that. Why do I have to have something? If I have to have that thing, I'd have it. But we think about it as an imperative rather than say what we have. My sense is it's because we're denying what we have, which is everything, in the name of thinking what we need is only what we think. So all of a sudden we get into this having to have cycle. So what do we have? More and more and more. And what do we end up? Not satisfied. We need more than that. We need something else. We need to shift careers, get a new suit, get a new this, get a new that. And yet the moment's always new. We have it new all the time and don't want to admit and acknowledge that. So we end up in these faltered states, going for other things. So it's a contemplation. It's literally just a consideration. It isn't an agreement. I don't say these things well enough to say, just think this, just do that. I don't know. It's what I do. It's what I've seen works with a lot of guys I work with. And I've seen it also have people start facing the depth, the seeming depth of what they thought truth was deep, which it isn't. It's got to be superficial if it's always true. It's got to be available and accessible all the time. What's deep is the bullshit we've created. And think somehow, and we talk about shit. I've talked about this a lot here. We have shit to do. We got to get our shit together. Who would want that in a sane world? Wouldn't we want bounty and abundance rather than shit? The shit is the waste product of bounty and abundance. It isn't the goal. That's just a natural byproduct of I've used everything worthy. There's nothing left. Get rid of it. I mean, imagine striving for constipation. But we do, because the tension we create in our body literally prevents it from. Most big bellies that you see are not fat. They're compacted feces in intestines that have grown to the point that some of them are this big. They're normally an inch or two across, but they've gotten so much stuff piled up in them that they're just extended to the point. If you've ever seen autopsy photos, you can go online and see it. It looks like a boa constrictor or a python. They're these see-through they get so thin and opaque because the walls of them are expanded to the point that they're filled with shit. Tension does that. It eliminates the body to function properly. And whenever we eat anything that's not good for us, our body seizes up. When you put meat on a barbecue, it shrinks, it contracts. The skin is still aware of fire.
Oh, blah.
The awareness is much greater than we think. Our body is filled with cells that are knowing what they're doing. They're not completely oblivious. And yet they're not thinking about what they're doing. Why? Because they know what to do. So what do? What they know to do. And what do? What we think we should do. What we think we know to do. Big gap when all we're doing is thinking about the thinking we're doing and thinking someday we'll get it right.
So when somebody asks what this discussion is about, some of it is learning to use your intuition more than just thinking about things to make decisions.
I would say we're using our intuition every day. We're just denying it.
But to pay attention to intuition more than thought for decisions.
I would say we're using it every day and aware of it every day, and we're denying it. If you begin to admit what you're doing wrong as wrong, you will not create further conflict to make believe you're not doing what's wrong or shouldn't be doing what's wrong, or what's happening is wrong enough not to think it's happening. You'll just start to be aware of it enough to allow it simply to be, because it is, by the way. Doesn't even allow us to be. We're introducing thinking to our knowing nature. We're introducing thinking to our being nature. We're introducing thinking to an absolute nature, and we've been relying on thinking to conclude the absolute nature, which has turned it seemingly against us because it's been out of order, and we act out of order by thinking out of order. Thinking is our most reliable source rather than being, and that nature, that absolute spiritual nature. We call it spiritual, but to it isn't spiritual at all. It just is what it is. It isn't God. God doesn't think, oh boy, don't refer to me as anything other than God. God would be all of it. God would be the potential for everything. But the choices we make are the evil that's caused. Those are the choices we make when we're thinking sick thoughts. We have sick consequences. That's the evil. And think of the word evil, live spelled backwards.
My friend said, I can't teach you to be spiritual, Anthony. It's an inside job.
It's not even inside, it's outside too.
You know, on the evil thing, it's the first time oral, we're speaking.
Yes.
Moral, oral.
Yes. Very good.
You know, and there's another one with it, moral. And also imagination fires. The lie that I've said is that writing's really hard and so I've got to really do lots of studying and research. No, actually, it was a groovy day. It was watching a nice movie, taking time. And then when, it's coming, get the voice recorder, go. And it just came out. And that was not that. It was from somewhere else.
Yes.
And it scared me as well.
Well,
it scared me.
You know, when we say things like we're scared, my experience is that we're starting to witness the fear we've been denying.
Yeah.
And so the bounty of the depth, human history has passed on genes through all generations, and those genes are adaptable. Every generation, the genes changes as they get passed on because they're constantly adapting to the environment. And we've created such a toxic mental environment that our genes have created toxicity and allergies to things that we normally wouldn't be allergic to. But the products that we're eating are actually converted and contorted as a result of the thinking we did to get them there, right? So if we're confronting a genetic predisposition, think of that as a position. It's not like one we choose in thought. It's one we have as a result of the body we have. Some of those things may seem intractable, but if we can actually relieve the body of constantly fighting for survival in relation to the thoughts we're having that are polluting it, our body immediately begins to adapt more naturally to the environment and performs in ways that will be successively beneficial to every other inheritor of these genes, because every one of us are basically living in half of our mother and half of our father. Our genetic structure is actually our parents' body. They've given us a body. We are living, we think they're dead when they're gone, and they're very much living with us here, aside from the spiritual nature that never dies. And I would say aside from that, as though that's secondary, but it's primary. And it's starting to realize this reversal. When you introduce the absolute to thinking, it relieves thinking of thinking it has to conclude what's absolute and realizes it's already in order. And you start seeing clearly that we've used language in ways that actually try to justify the insanity by saying things and like getting away with something. In mental conditions, getting away with it is taking the condition with you. That's why geographics don't work. You know, everybody always says, I always ended up wherever I went. That's not an irony. That's just absolute reality. That's how it is. We always end up where we are because we're always where we are in a physical form. Where we are as beings probably isn't in a physical form. And it doesn't make sense to this physical form. So to spend time trying to make sense out of something that doesn't make sense, that makes perfect sense, is crazy. It's already in perfect order. The laws of nature, we try to conquer them when in fact they're designed to be obeyed.
Cooperate with them. Cooperate. As you said before, with Darwin and origin of species, cooperate with them.
Well, and think of the word cooperate. It means our operations are functional rather than dysfunctional. Think of the word coincidence. It means everything's happening simultaneously. All incidences are happening simultaneously. They're co-happening. Coincidence. What do we use it as? As an excuse. So immoral stories are all excuses that we shouldn't be where we are with what we have. And guess what? We're always where we are with exactly what we have, regardless of the story.
And coincidence, we only say that word at
As
a
an
moment
excuse.
when and at a moment when we recognize that everything's really happening exactly where it is. And that
Well, we'll also use it though
we have this sudden awareness that something seems like that was out of the ordinary. Well, yeah.
Yes.
But we use it almost as though it's a gamble and a chance rather than a direct consequence of exactly what we were thinking and doing. And
Right.
it doesn't mean it's my thinking alone. It's all of our thinking collectively that's causing the environment that we're seeing. It isn't wrong for me to assess someone else may be wrong. It becomes wrong when I think the clarity of my own thinking is so clear as to see what's wrong in them, when the impulse to even think about them in that way is wrong. If the eyes I'm looking through are clouded, Bible says you cannot see clearly when you have a beam in your own eye. If the eyes I'm using are unclear, then what I'm seeing is never. Isn't it interesting how certain we are of what's wrong in others, and while we're still living in doubt and insecurity and uncertainty? How does that add up?
Mm-hmm.
Have perfect assurance that everybody else is fucked up, but I have nothing to do with it. It's like, imagine that. To your point earlier, Dee, we seem to have great confidence in how people operate, and we've never even seen them all.
Right.
So in that same blindness, we can say that we're not part of it, and we can say that we know so much about it, but it just shows how willing we are to go in these directions to disclaim a knowing nature that must know it, because if it didn't know it, it wouldn't be absolutely knowing. It wouldn't be omnipotent or omnipresent or omniscient. Couldn't be that if it had one speck of lack in relation to knowing.
Yeah.
So if it is, it is. And if it is who we are, it is what we are, and it is what we are made of, and it is the source of our experience. And we can think it's not, and that's a choice. And we will dysfunction accordingly and manifest things according to that thought. Because the trigger of those thoughts appear then to be happening to us for the sake of our knowing nature, Anthony. We know better, so we want to pretend that it's not us doing it. We don't have anything to do with it. And how sick is it of us to see the capacity we have to create and then disown the creation of the misery and the wrong that we've created and think somehow we're going to get better. We seem to be more than happy to take credit for things that are undue, like the bounty of a harvest. You got to say thanks at some point for nature to even provide the potential to even have a harvest. And we are quick to take credit and slow to take any discredit. Interesting. That doesn't align. It doesn't line up. It's a natural conflict in the way we're thinking.
So do you think if the Indians would have still been leading and using their philosophies, that the world would be in a better place?
You know, Anthony, I think of the world as it is. I haven't spent a lot of time trying to make that calculation. I really, what I know is that what's happened, and what we are witnessing right now is the culmination of everything that has happened. Everything. Literally, the present is where the past is alive now. Because everything that's ever been changed has occurred is what is occurring now. It's also the potential for the future in every respect. And the freedom I have from the past is realizing it's in the present. And it's the culmination of everything we all share, not just what's happening for me and what I'm going to make out of what's happening. It's happening for everyone simultaneous, whether they think so or not. Truth is true for all that are and all that is, period. It isn't exceptional. It isn't because it can't be accepted. It can't have exceptions. It just is what it is, as it is. And how it is how it is now. When it is when it is now. Where it is where we are now. How it is how it is. Just is what it is. It is as it is. So all the questions we can use in those words, the why of it is the it of it. It isn't so much to question why, but to acknowledge that. And when it comes to starting to have the clarity, you're going to witness things you thought you weren't doing that will be hard to stomach literally because the anxiety and stress in your stomach will become more obvious. And to sit through that feeling and sensation is what you've been running from your life. And as you witness it, it will reveal to you what it is rather than you having to search for the why of it. You will know it because you already know it to be containing the consequence of it. If there's a consequence, there's a cause. And if the cause is connected to the effect and the effect is conceded, the feeling of it, the aware, the body somatics, it will naturally reveal what we thought was hidden because we've been trying to hide from the feeling and trying to pretend that being uncomfortable was the only thing we never wanted, when in fact it was indicating something is wrong in what we're thinking. It's such a perfectly ordered manual. It's like our owner's manual that we know immediately. Whoever reads their car manual, now they're 300 pages long. You basically only read it when something goes wrong. How do I fix the tire? Actually, more than that, where's the tire jack? Most people don't even know how to get the car lifted up. Where is it? Where's it hidden? But this is a manual we already know, we've always known, and we act as though we don't. And to begin to concede that the wrong we feel and the discomfort we feel is the same thing we feel when the tire blows out in our car and all of a sudden it's not driving as smoothly. And if we ignored it, probably wouldn't help us get where we were going. The rubber would fall off. We'd be down to one wheel. The car would be wobbly. It wouldn't handle as well. The wheel would get worn out. So if we could get a new tire, there'd be no wheel to put it on. On and on and on. And it gets worse and worse and worse as the more chronic we are in the maintenance of it, the more the maintenance in this regard actually helps maintain things. It doesn't eliminate them. Means we're asking for it to continue. So the letting go is realizing we've never held on to anything other than a thought we were hanging on to something. There isn't anything there. And that's the freedom. We will know a new freedom, the book says. Why is it new? Because it's now. What's old? Any thought about something that isn't happening now is a thought about something that's old, as though it's not new, when in fact we're thinking of it newly now. Why would I be taking the attention I have and spending it on something else exclusively that isn't happening, when I'm missing the witness of everything that is happening as a result? Or at least I'm thinking to my thinking, I'm not paying attention to it to warrant the attention I'm paying to the thing that isn't happening.
Moen has his hand up.
I would say fucking lunacy. Moeen, sorry, I don't actually look for the hands. I look for faces. What's happening?
How are you guys doing?
Good.
Well,
very good, very good. Thank you so much for inviting me, and it's been a pleasure. Unfortunately, I have to leave. I'm going to the ocean. Just want to thank you for having me, and I will.
Can I introduce the process you're going through before you step into the ocean, Moeen?
Yeah, please.
So Moeen was introduced to me. How long ago? Yeah, there he is. How long ago did we meet the first time? 3 weeks?
More, like 45 days ago.
45 days. Okay.
Yes.
So Moeen was introduced by a friend of mine, young friend who knows what I do and what I deal with. And he said, you might want to meet my friend, Moeen. He said he is doing a process where he commits to 40 days abstinence of all mind-altering drugs, including caffeine, sugar, anything that would influence his experience, and then spends 31 days doing whatever he wants. Huh?
I said, thank you.
Oh. Then he spends 31 days doing what he wants. And then he goes back to 40 days of not doing anything. Now, what's interesting about that is that in our conversation, the first time Moeen and I sat down, we spoke for over 3 hours, and we got to the end and he said, how long have we been here? 40 minutes or so, or an hour? I said, no, it's been 3. Because time takes on a different dimension when you're actually engaged over things that I suspect are real and true because they're not in time. So time, like our conversation is set for an hour and a half. We often go three hours. We've gone as long as 4 hours and 40 minutes in our conversation. But good morning, Pauline.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Very well. I enjoyed our conversation the other night.
Yeah, me too. It was so good.
So one of the things that Maureen says is that in the early days of his abstinence, he notices the withdrawal and the tendency of the body to want to do what he's been doing. All of those things that get into his, if it's nicotine, if it's caffeine, if it's sugar, whatever it is, there's a, what is it, about 10 days before you notice that that you've been relieved of those things? He's going to do this, by the way, until he's 40. So it's going to be, it's an 8-year cycle that he's committed to.
This guy is crazy.
Well, thank you for the introduction.
I mean, I think that's a fair assessment of what you're doing too, right?
Yeah, I'm sure that you explain it much better than what I do.
But the interesting thing is that weaning off of the thoughts is the same process we go through when we start realizing we don't have to continue entertaining thoughts that have not been true. And what happens is we start noticing the tendencies, those sort of little tendencies that start to provoke us into thinking it's the only thing we can do. So noticing what's wrong is a chance to be free enough to right that condition. Thinking of it as right is an impossibility, so it creates a fight. And as this awareness becomes obvious, because I would say it's been obvious the whole time, we've just been hell-bent on twisted thinking to try to pretend that preoccupation and consumption of thought in other directions warranted us paying no attention to what we were doing when in fact we knew it all along. And I would say that's the ultimate shame and guilt that we tend to experience, which is an accurate consequence of what we're doing that's shameful, because there's no excuse, literally. You can make up excuses all you want, but that just means you're making up excuses to continue doing something that obviously is shameful. That doesn't even add up in any kind of reason. And we're guilty for it. We treat guilty as a feeling when in fact it's a verdict. The verdict's in, the jury's voted. We're guilty. We've done it. We're the ones. We're the culprits. We're feeling it because we're doing it. As you start this in any degree and start noticing the clarity, you'll start noticing the things you've been ignoring and making believe that the numbness created by the ignorance, which is denial, has been an anesthesia, anesthetic, eliminating the pain. And you'll feel the pain. I had a panic attack when this started to occur to me. My whole body turned gray. I walked out of a coffee shop and a woman looked at me and almost dropped to her knees because she could just see that she could sense something was seriously wrong. I thought I was dying. And it all came from a thought that I was writing about ego. And I said, what are you writing about? You're trying to define ego and it has no basis. And bam, I had this sense of fear that just engulfed my body because the defense against these ideas was gone. I'd conceded the fact that there was nothing there to even talk about and think about. Why write about it? Why define it in all these little details and give it a seemingly more life through definition? And it just, the awareness of that fear, which I didn't get immediately, but with a little time I got perspective, the awareness of the fear had been that fear I'd been holding in my stomach and my shoulders and my neck for years, decades, as a consequence of the maintenance of that underlying, those underlying thoughts. In the big book, Bill says, look, we looked at motives and conditions, causes and conditions in the inventory, moral inventory, by the way, not an immoral inventory, not a new way of writing our story that's more justified and rationalized, but starting to see, oh, we're at the center of the thinking we're doing that's causing the problem. That's the immoral idea is the one that I don't have anything to do with it. Somebody's piano is playing.
Sorry, I should mute myself.
But anyway, Moeen is going through that process, and it's been interesting because most of us get sober and don't strive to drink and use, but I would suggest he probably doesn't have an alcoholic addictive tendency and may. I don't know. He'll figure that out. but that if he can do it and stop it and do it and stop it, it's an interesting bit of insight to see what the consequences are of that process and the insight that comes out of it.
It's getting off of coffee that's the hard one.
Well, cigarettes is a hard one. Lying is a hard one. When you think that they're true. And that's ultimately what the lie is in addiction, is that somehow it's something we can do without consequence, rather than see it clearly with perspective that it's going to create the same consequence. If the drug is addictive physically, it's going to create a physical addiction as a consequence. And yet it's my thought about it being something I can do with impunity that has me continue to do it so much that my body becomes so used to it, my body thinks it's normal in a way when it's actually abnormal in every way. And that's what disease is. It just starts to pile up over time. So anyway, Moeen goes swimming. I met him at the other night when he was at the end of his 40-day cycle, and he baked a huge birthday cake for himself in a frying pan that was basically the biggest cookie I've ever eaten. But he went through that cycle, and he'll come back and talk to us about his insight and all that stuff too. So
for sure.
And
so
Paula,
who else is on the call?
Can you see us?
I only can see Jack, but I don't know who. They say 7 participants, and so it's
Douglas, Dee Dee, Jana, Jackie.
You have to turn the page. If you
Matthew and Anthony.
You can see more people.
So is it okay to go around and introduce? I introduce myself, and to be fair, like everybody introduce themselves as well.
Swipe left on your screen and more boxes will appear.
There's a thing in the upper right-hand corner, I think.
There you go. Okay. Technology, these days.
So Jan is in Hawaii. Douglas and Dee Dee are in Cabo. Matthew's in London. Jackie's in West LA somewhere. Anthony's in San Diego. And when you come back, your introduction will be your interaction and your experience, and you share.
All right. Well, that was a warm up then.
Yeah, it was more of who you are in the context of. We had a conversation the other night with. It's Paula, right?
Yeah. Paula,
who's from Barcelona, and
Paula, they're talking about you. You should come here.
So she and I got into a conversation the other night, and I introduced her to some of these ideas, and it was fun to watch her face. She's 25, and I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.
So how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Very nice. Are you funny?
Yeah, ready to go to the beach and swim in the sea.
What we talk about here is what you and I talked about individually the other night, Paula.
Okay. I will start to join your podcast.
Yeah, well, that you can hear. We put these up so people can just listen, so they don't have to have me tell them what I think they should be doing.
Yeah.
To give them some relief. Anyway, I enjoyed our conversation. I'm happy to have you here, and you're always welcome. And everyone that comes is coming to be able to talk publicly about what you and I described, what you and I talked about individually.
Perfect.
On a broader level, to see the commonality amongst a group rather than just 1 or 2 people.
Yeah.
She's down.
She's down. Well, then we're up.
That's a balance.
Teeter-totter.
That's a balance.
Anyway, have a good swim.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And when I'm back, if you guys are around, I dial in.
Okay. I don't know. We'll probably go a little longer.
Okay. Very nice meeting you, everybody.
Swim well.
Thanks. You too. See you.
See you.
So another angle. We feel complete.
Yeah, I guess so for the moment.
How about now?
This moment too.
Any questions, directions, ideas, thoughts, conflicts?
I feel like Pinocchio. I feel like, hey, Giuseppe, I'm real. It's like, okay, like that's a lie, that's a lie, that's a lie, that's a lie, that's a lie. Here we go.
Isn't it funny that our noses even get bigger as we get older?
The lies we tell.
So Giuseppe or whatever, he was on to something. So
somebody told me that scientists have discovered that our ears continue to grow after we die.
It's because of all the fake listening we were doing while we were alive. They're still trying to accomplish the goal that was set for them. I have very good hearing, but I'm listening impaired. So
yes, right.
I say no hearing aid helps. So this was very good for me today. I will express my thanks and my appreciation because as an individual body speaking for the individuality of the body, having this conversation that is engaging with others that are also sharing their experience from their point of view, their body, is to really talk in terms that I suspect are meaningful and useful enough to be able to continue the conversation in our daily walks, wherever we go, without selling it to anybody, because we're not creating that box to have somebody buy something, but actually begin to notice that they have it and start to concede it in the approach we have with people and see the thoughts that I can't count the number of times during a day my first impression of somebody is, what an idiot. Right now, and I immediately, especially when I'm driving, I mean, that's when it really becomes, I'm like, where did people get their light? How can they think that, hitting their brakes in the middle of an intersection is the best thing you could do right now? So it challenges me to see that meditation is ultimately a process of a continuation of awareness that we're always in. And if I'm starting to think about it as something I'm only doing 20 minutes in the morning or 20 minutes at night next to a babbling brook, I'm creating an environment that's conducive to peace rather than facing issues that aren't always conducive to peace. So I can start applying what Bill says, we can have serenity in the face of calamity, which means that all things can be breaking loose. And I would say he's actually reassuring us in his words that there is an absolute peaceful nature that I have regardless of what I'm thinking. And simply to start thinking that what's confounding to me and what's confusing and what's breaking my experience of serenity isn't a break with serenity, but a break in thinking. That's it. And it starts to actually, Bill also said that we suffer from a lack of proportion. What does that mean? The guy who doesn't drive right becomes the biggest idiot I can think of, right? I want to pull him out of his car. That's the imagery that goes on my head. And yet people suffering in mass around the world have nothing to do with me. Lack of proportion. If I'm part of it all, I'm part of it all. And if all of that part includes that suffering, I'm part of that too. And to see things in ways that I only think they are is to see things disproportionately to serve the thinking I'm doing rather than the actual reality that I'm facing and witnessing in a knowing presence that I'm trying to deny by making believe my thinking is going to dominate my experience. And so doing this together here, and Jana was in the beginning of this, and Anthony, how long ago we meet Anthony?
Been a couple of years.
Probably 3 or 4. Yeah. Anthony almost fell off of his chair the first time we met because he got some of this very quickly.
Yeah,
and then Jackie's a friend of Gabe's who was here earlier, and Jana. They've been involved now for 2 years, basically, as this has developed. And what's interesting is, as much as I always wanted to talk about this, I never did. And once I did, I started realizing this is something that's been in me since I was a kid. These are the things I thought I couldn't say because of the authorities I thought were so great as to not listen. And because they were telling me what to do, that what I needed to do was modify my behavior rather than say no. And I was great at opposing authority.
I remember my dad said, that Jack, he's a genius.
Anthony's father came and, my sense is that if we already know everything, we speak of genius as finally being an admission of what we know. It isn't genius. It's just knowledge. It's an inherent, absolute nature we all have. And to think of it as different than that is to think of it as exceptional rather than common, and rather than usual, and rather than natural, and to assign all these attributes to it, to feel as though we're disqualified from it, which only serves the thinking I'm doing that's less than, in ways to continue to manifest things that I see in ways that contribute to that thinking. It's not true. It's not real. So any of the conflict is always a consequence of the thinking I'm doing, because there is no, everything that's interacting in the universe is interacting in perfect harmony to be doing everything that it's doing right now, including us. We just don't think we are, so we're creating messes to make believe that our thoughts are true by making believe that the world is out to get us.
And maybe my mom was listening to it more than I really realized she was listening, because she was always in the background.
Anthony's father practiced law until he was 90, Anthony?
Oh my God.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
So he came into this discussion and used everything he'd ever learned in court to try to present his case. And he was such a sweetheart. And it was so amazing because he was old enough and wise enough and lithe enough to engage. And he actually started getting very vital in his engagement because he was used to having that and hadn't been doing that as he was retired and, getting a little older. But so he and I went back and forth, and he started to concede that he was basically an avowed atheist and was sure that it didn't exist. And I said, well, what if it does exist? Would your assurance prevent it from existing? Would your confidence in your thoughts prevent it if it did exist? And he said, no, I guess not. And he started
thought about that for a while.
He had that little pop. And it was funny because he got easier in the conversation, where prior to that, he'd always come with a bit of a contentious nature, which for me is fun because I appreciate when I've been told to get fucked here, I basically said, thank you for the most honesty that anybody bothered to express today. Because I'm sure people do not like what I always say, but don't bother to mention it. And I'm perfectly capable of hearing things that would counter the self-adulation that I would love to be the only thing to have happen. Because I know that's crazy. If the self I'm adulating is what we all share, then it's my adulation of everyone that actually confirms the possibility for me to be in that realm of admiration and recognition and acknowledgement and status, whatever that status might be. It all becomes possible as a result of everyone rather than my own thinking that's causing everyone else to look worse than I am so I can make believe I'm better. That's just more sick thinking. So I can tell by the faces as I have faces to watch. Jackie doesn't always let me watch her face, and Anthony occasionally is walking around too much to keep still. But I appreciate the responses. I appreciate the potential to do this because the vocabulary becomes a little easier in my daily conversations. And I catch myself launching into ideas that I've always repeated in the name of being tolerant or nice or well-mannered, and realizing those things aren't true at all. That's just another inaccuracy. That's more gravy I'm putting on the shit to have it taste more like mashed potatoes. But in fact, when you dig in, it's not going to. It might look like mashed potatoes. It might look like mashed potatoes with gravy, but it's not going to be when I get into the eating of it. So, eating humble pie is probably starting to eat things that I stop saying things that I choke on. So this conversation has allowed me that in many, many, many ways. And I witness that every day. And it's given me a different sense. My sense is that Cortez looked for the fountain of youth and Bill Wilson discovered it. That the youth is seeing that there's an absolute state of being that isn't aging and hasn't gotten old. And wrinkles in time do not go to some kind of doctor to have them eliminated. That just ripples that
Thanks, Jack.
naturally occur.
And a way that this actually helped in the real world for me is like, I noticed too, when I looked around, my room was messy, and I went quickly into, God damn it, room is always messy. And I go, you know what? I'm not going to play that track today. I'm going to play, I can clean it, and it's really not the worst thing in the world. And it's not who I am. So that seems a little healthier.
Well, Anthony, when you have that impulse and start seeing how critical you are, having that impulse as critical is revealing to you that you're thinking things you don't think you're thinking. And to help them get better by feeling better about them is to deny the depth of that awareness.
Uh-huh.
And the immediacy of it is okay to say, wow, I'm really critical. I'm really abusive over these little things. How could something as my room being a mess, when my thoughts have always been a mess, be so big a problem? Think of the space in your head being the ultimate room you're occupying. And if it's all over the place, why wouldn't you need some place to have it look like you're better off having your room a mess to give yourself a little bit of relief?
I like that. Interesting. Thanks, Jack.
So I love you guys. I love the potential for this. And I want to again suggest that the hours during the week is when trying this stuff on, because it isn't, I'm not saying it with any certainty that it's something you should know. If it's what you do know, I'm going to presume you already know, and how you translate that will come as a result of letting the thoughts occur to you in ways that you try them on like a new pair of shoes and then walk in them to see that your original idea about how they fit was in fact correct. Because 10 miles down the road, they're still working. They're not causing blisters and pain. So start trying it on and just seeing how you can apply it and see where it fits. Because ultimately, utilization is in the expression, and find like 2 + 2 is 4. Once you learn it, you don't have to go back through the rudimentary steps it took to learn it. You just apply it. There's the freedom. When you're acting principally, you'll start thinking principally, you'll start acting principally, and you'll know things confidently will work because you've used them once. They work perfectly. Why change? Why do anything else? Then you can really develop from there. And that's the bounty of our potential to be, our functional capacity is our functional literacy, to read the body language and take it as direction rather than something to avoid and deny and get over. Start to see that it's our manual saying to us, something's wrong here. You might want to pay attention. You don't have to, but you may just wait until it's so bad you can't help but pay attention because you're on the edge of death. And humans have done that for a long time. So I love you guys.
Jack,
this is awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys came from
Thanks,
Cabo.
everybody.
Thanks for flying in from Cabo.
Yeah. My arms are a bit tired, but I'm okay.
Thank you. Love you.
Love you guys.
Night, Jackie.
Bye.
Hi.